Welcome in, people.
Hello.
Episode 2. Everything sucks. Let's fix it.
What a fantastic name we came up with, honestly.
We should praise ourselves every time.
We should.
We're wearing suits.
Looking very official.
And we're on camera.
For the first time.
Hopefully this goes well. I'm intending to do all of this editing, so if it goes poorly,
It'll be your fault.
it will be my fault.
Which is great. So I can take none of the blame for its failure.
Exactly.
And it can all be on you.
The only blame you'll have to take is for the poor content of the podcast.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And for our atrocious setup that we currently have rocking.
Well, we'll just be rolling out a Patreon soon enough so that users can pay for a better experience.
Yeah. Please give us money.
Okay, so should we start?
Yeah, let's start.
Current
Let's do
events.
it. Wait, you know what? Recap of the format. We are...
Yeah.
Yes, recap of the format. So first we're going to start off with some current events. That's going to be part one. Talk about, some policy stuff going down in Washington. Talk about international politics. Talk about local politics and stuff like that. Then we're going to get into our readings for the week. Do you want to read through the chapter headlines that we're talking about? Which chapters we're reading?
You would have to give me a second because I would have to open the book.
And then our third part is going to be a little bit debate/conversation about the future of democracy and kind of like, what do you have to say?
I would say the ideological underpinnings, what
Okay.
democracy is,
Okay.
strengths, weaknesses. It's going to be, we were coming into this thinking it would be a debate. I've been listening to some very kind of anti-democratic ideas recently.
Yeah.
I was very with them as I've been thinking more this week. I'm a little less with them, but I think there are still merits. So, and it's something that's kind of taken for granted a lot in our culture, and I think
For
it's
sure.
an interesting discussion at the very least.
At the very least. I mean, Plato thought it was interesting enough, right? So,
Exactly. Yeah. We'll just say the chapters when we get to the
Okay.
segment, I think.
All right. We'll keep you on your toes on the chapter.
Exactly. Exciting stuff. So, current events. We're going to start with the debt ceiling.
Yes. The most important thing going on in America right now.
Exactly.
Easily.
We talked about this last week because it was still one of the most important things. There is still no agreement that House Republicans have come to with Biden on the debt ceiling. Honestly, like when I look it up right now, and again for context, today is May 19th.
Mm-hmm.
I'll reiterate that Janet Yellen, who is Secretary of the Treasury, she expects that we could default on our debt as soon as June 1st. So we're like 12 days out right now.
Crazy.
When I look up debt ceiling, the top stories say debt limits hit snag. Debt limit talks hit snag as Republicans declare pause. Republicans walk out of debt ceiling talks.
Yeah. It did not go well today.
No.
And, and McCarthy has a rule in the House that any bill needs 72 hours to read before you can vote on it.
Really?
Yes. So we're really getting down to the wire.
Oh, wow.
So we might have 12 days on paper or whatever it is in the calendar, but in congressional time, we have much less time, especially since the Senate isn't even in session next week.
Wow.
So we're really running low on time here.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So what is going on in these talks? What is really important to keep in mind when these talks are going on is we're only getting told what the people making the negotiations want to be leaked to the media. Anything that we read in Politica or The Time, that is because Joe Biden and someone in his circle wanted it to get leaked. It's all very strategic.
True.
So one of the things that I think is notable about this conversation over the last week was Joe Biden has come around and said that he was open to some work requirements for some welfare programs, but he specifically said that he would not sign off on any measures that block access to medical care. He said, I am not going to accept any work requirements that's going to impact on medical health needs of people. I am not going to accept work requirements that go much beyond what is already. Now, that sounds like he's against work requirements when he says beyond what is already, but what the proposed bill or what the Republican proposal is, especially to add work requirements to food stamps, is for able-bodied people between the ages of 49 and 55 who are childless, make them have to go back to work to qualify for the food stamps. That is the specific work requirement they're pushing to add.
I see.
They're also trying to get rid of certain credits on the on the TANF, TANF measures, and that is the temporary. I forgot what it was.
I'll try to Google.
Thanks.
Yeah.
What is it? TANF. Temporary assistance for needy families. That's what it is.
Okay.
And a lot of families don't have to go through work requirements to get this benefit in a lot of states, because of past credits. The state is able to waive them off and say, we have the credit, you're fine.
Okay.
But the Republicans want to reset that credit and, eliminate those people from the temporary assistance for needy families benefits.
I see.
Yes. So that is where the line is drawn, and we don't know where Biden is going to come down on those two things. He has pushed for work requirements and programs in the past, especially under the Bill Clinton administration. So this is not outside of his ideology here.
Okay.
This is definitely in the framework of what he probably believes, And
he does have to make concessions to make sure that we don't default.
Right. There has to be something. Or the progressive option, which 5 senators or 6 senators wrote a letter to the president this week.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey, some others. I think John Fetterman is also pushing for this, but I don't know if he signed his name on the letter, calling for him to use the 14th Amendment to bypass the debt ceiling.
Okay.
This is a big deal. We're talking about some high-stakes senators pushing for this. We're now talking about the Congressional Progressive Caucus with AOC and Ilhan Omar, Pramila Jayapal, and Jamal Bowman pushing for something similar. Maybe the progressives just want him to threaten the use of the 14th Amendment in the conversation, or maybe they actually want him to go through with that.
Yeah.
But either way, Biden is in a really rough spot.
Yeah, it seems like political, not suicide, maybe suicide. I'm not sure it's political suicide as far as getting reelected for Biden, but as far as moving an agenda with a Republican-controlled House, it seems like you're done.
Totally done. I mean, it's done from the beginning in our current environment, right? But,
well, in that case, then maybe there's no reason not to.
Maybe there's no reason not to. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is here, but I do know that we should not be cutting assistance for needy families, and I do know that we shouldn't be taking food away from people. So I know those things. You know what I mean?
And that we shouldn't be defaulting on the debt.
And what I noticed was polling this week was interesting. The polling coming out indicates that Biden will take most of the blame. Yes, people are saying like a 33 to 29% margin. The rest said both.
Okay.
So a plurality,
That's not a huge...
It's not a huge deal.
Difference.
But, the breakdown came from independents saying Biden. And independents decide a lot of elections and a lot of the key House elections, right?
Sure.
A lot of the key House races are decided by independents.
Yeah.
So that's, that's a hard thing. So he's in a really bad spot. The country's in a really hard spot. And again, I want to emphasize, you know how many countries have debt limits in the world? Do you know how many?
No.
It's 2. Us and Denmark are the only countries in the world that have debt limits. All of the countries work. They all work fine. The debt limit does nothing except give us the opportunity to destroy ourselves.
Yeah. I was actually just listening to a podcast. Ezra Klein had someone on to talk on the opposite side of this about why the debt ceiling is a good idea, because Ezra is firmly of the belief that it is terrible. It just makes no sense. It's stupid. And the person he had on, whose name I'm unfortunately not remembering, is basically making the case that it's good to have some point of leverage to have a discussion about reducing government spending or trying to reduce the deficit at least. And I do have to say it's something interesting as I've learned about it more. I feel like I used to just be of the mindset that the debt didn't matter and just keep spending. But I think part of where I've started to shift on that is knowing that 17% of our budget annually is going towards just paying off our interest. And I wonder if it's affecting our economy. So I don't know. I feel at least a little bit more wishy-washy, less certain on that.
Well, I'll tell you, I have become more wishy-washy on the deficit and the debt in general. I used to be a firm believer, and not a firm believer, but I used to be curious about the modern monetary theory And that's a suggestion that the debt really doesn't matter. It just matters as long as it impacts inflation. Other than that, it doesn't matter at all. And then when you have inflation, you tax the money out of the system. When there's too much money in the system, you just tax it back out. That's what the modern monetary theorists would say. And there's some truth to that, but I think there is a problem when our debt to GDP ratio is going to hit like 120% in the next, I don't know what we're at now. I think we're over 100% for sure.
Yeah.
And it's one of the only times we've been at over 100% in our country's history. And I think the other notable one was World War II. So during COVID, it made sense. COVID is a World War II equivalent.
Yeah.
Is the new norm going to be over 100% GDP? Because where does that leave us to go when we do have a recession and we need fiscal policy, right?
I think that's a big part of the problem is like we can't expect that no other crises are going to come down the line. And that can just completely hamstring us if we do have to borrow a lot more. I think there is also some risk that credit ratings on U.S. bonds go down, and they haven't yet, which is like probably a piece of evidence in favor of the idea that the debt doesn't matter, because our debt is huge, and people still want to buy U.S. Treasury bonds at a good rate. But one of the things the person on this podcast said, the guest said, is that in France, one of the ratings agencies just downgraded France's bonds because of its debt, combined with what it's viewing as an inability for France to govern because of its polarization.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
Very familiar as to what's going on here. I think if that's the thing, like this is all really built on a house of cards. Like anything in the financial sector, including the U.S. Treasury bond, it's about the speculation or the perception.
Yeah, it's all perception
of the safety of it. So if certain ratings agencies just start to think it's a little bit less likely that the U.S. will pay down their debt, and that some of these bonds might not get paid, which look at how close we're getting right now, then we're getting closer and closer to massive crisis.
No, I agree. I do think there needs to be something that there needs to be some areas in which we need to find some slim down. Obviously what am I going to say for that? I'm going to say you can cut the military budget by a bit.
I'm going to say raise taxes.
Yeah, I'm going to say raise taxes. That's the first thing I'm going to say, right?
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, we need the military budget for Ukraine. That's
honestly.
Yes. Okay. So
move on.
Let's move on. That was our debt ceiling talk. We're probably going to keep that up until this is over. We might talk about it again next week too, because that's when it's going to come to a head. Yeah. Right.
Oh, definitely. We'll talk about it next week, and probably the week after that.
Probably.
Yeah.
What's next?
Next thing on the list is the China Central Asia Summit, which I guess we'll kind of talk about with the G7, which is starting today. So the G7, I actually don't know the 7 countries in this G7. I'm going to look that up right now.
I don't even know if I can name them. Let's see. Germany, France, UK, Italy, Japan, US.
Wait, which ones did you say?
All right. Germany.
Yeah.
France.
Yeah.
Italy.
Yeah.
UK.
Yes.
US.
Yes.
Japan.
Yes.
There's one more. Hold on.
Canada. Interesting how they slid in there.
That's not a real country.
Yeah, they're just US plus.
Yeah. They're USA DLC.
Yeah, exactly. So their meeting, which I assume, they'll talk about things like Ukraine and the threat of China. But what I've found more interesting is the parallel summit that China is having with Central Asian countries, including Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all the stands.
We stand the stands.
Yes. And the reason it's interesting, China's doing this under the guise of like promoting its Belt and Road Initiative, wanting to invest more in the infrastructure of these countries. The interesting point to me is China is clearly inserting itself as the hegemon in the region, where Russia very clearly used to dominate. And Russia is distracted by the Ukraine war. China has the opportunity to slip in.
Kazakhstan's the big player there. Kazakhstan they've had a very close economic tie to Russia for a long time. I think it's their biggest trading partner, and I think China is going to try to take that. There's a lot of economic opportunity in Kazakhstan. It's at the crossroads of the East and the West. There's a lot of opportunity in that region.
Yeah.
And China's going to capitalize on it hardcore.
Totally. That's what's so good for China is they don't have to go through Russia in their trade routes to the West anymore.
No, they don't.
If they have these countries.
Yeah, and I think it's in all of their interests to go over the China. We were talking about last week that the Chinese model could be used as an alternative to the American model, right?
Yes.
And this is China building their own quote unquote G7. You know what I mean? This is what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be pretty successful for the next couple of years. One day We'll talk deeply about China and why I don't think it won't last more than 20, but we'll talk about that at some point.
Yes.
Do you want to move on to the next? No, you know what? The next thing about the G7 summit, Biden indicated that he would be okay with European countries sending F-16s to Ukraine, which is a big escalation.
Okay, I heard something about that.
Yes,
but I didn't see that it had gone either way from Biden yet.
Oh, he might have been talking about it. Okay.
Yeah, I saw that it was being
open to it.
Considered that he's open to it. But the U.S. does have to give the go-ahead on that. And I don't think it's happened yet.
Okay. We'll see. How do you feel about the F-16s going to Ukraine?
I can't imagine really what the consequences would be. And if there are no tangible consequences, I'm really up for anything that helps Ukraine.
Right. I mean, the only consequence I could think is the only consequence to any of this is you push Russia too far and they use a nuke. But I just don't buy that.
No.
Yeah, I don't.
No. Like, us sending planes to Ukraine is not going to push it to that point.
No. I mean, yeah, we already gave them enough weapons to, become like the largest army in Europe almost.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So
when you think about it, we're doing this very smartly. Like, just continuing to budge the line further and further. So at no point, like, can Putin really say that it snapped because we're doing it gradually enough.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to move on to the next topic. Still on international politics. Biggest election probably of the year was the Turkish election.
Yes.
We had the first round, and I'll read out the results. Erdogan, he got 49.5% of the vote. His opposition, Kemal, he got 44.9% of the vote. Mm-hmm. And then another candidate, Ogan, he got 5.2% of the vote. So opposition in total did fairly basically as well as Erdogan, but Erdogan fell below that 50% threshold that was crucial for him to win the presidency. If he won 50% in this election, he would still be president today. But because he fell under that 50%, there's going to be another election in a couple weeks that will decide who will be the president of Turkey, and if Turkey will continue going down their rightward shift.
Yeah, this is a huge deal. I feel like for Turkey's politics.
Definitely.
Erdogan he's very pro-Russia. He's been moving away from the West, criticizing the United States and its European allies
against the expansion of NATO. Right, he was against the Finland entry, against Swedish entry.
Exactly. And like you're saying, he is the staunch right-wing candidate. He's been making Turkey much more of kind of a traditional religious outpost, religious conservative outpost. The opposition is not that. It is, and Erdogan has also been very undemocratic.
Yeah,
he's ruled fairly authoritarianly. The opposition is supported by the youth of the country. It's going to be less strictly religious and conservative, open things up, be more liberal. When I saw these results, I kind of, my shoulders kind of sunk. The breath kind of let out of me. I wasn't happy with it because it seems too good for Erdogan for me. And you disagree.
I do. I think it's better for the opposition. I think there are some districts that swung away from Erdogan from the last presidential election, specifically around the suburbs around Istanbul, swang from pro-Erdogan in the last election to now pro-opposition.
Okay.
I think that's a good development. Also, the person who came in third, Ogan, who got 5.2%, will, in all probability, be endorsing Kemal, Erdogan's opposition.
Sure.
And if we combine those two parties, we have a number bigger than Erdogan's vote share.
True.
So that's why I'm hopeful, and I'm glad we made it into the second round. But that's kind of why I think it's a good thing. Obviously I'm disappointed we couldn't knock him out in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
It's disappointing that still so much of the country is so committed to his path forward.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of sleazy games going on, especially in the Kurdish cities. Kurdish? Yeah. Especially in the Kurdish cities, with election watchers, quote unquote. You hear poll watchers all the time in the United States now, shutting down poll stations in Kurdish majority cities and Kurdish townships. And, despite that, he did not win in the first round. And that makes me happy,
True. Hopefully it's progress, at least. Because the polling had Kemal over Erdogan.
I know.
And so that's why I expected maybe it still went to a runoff, but I thought a win outright, or at least a lead,
right,
for Kemal going into a runoff election would have made sense. Yeah. And so for this is a 5-point difference in voting between the two. And I honestly wonder if how much power Erdogan has there, and if he's
that close.
Well, if he's able to meddle with this election.
Right, so I'm saying if he's that close in that margin, maybe he could meddle and make the difference, right?
Yeah, right? Exactly.
If it's not it's so interesting about this polling thing, because we saw the same thing in the Brazil election last year or something. I forgot exactly when it was, but Lula versus Bolsonaro. The polling had Lula way up. But the time election come around, Lula only won by 2 or 3% or something. It was very close. And I don't know why that is. I don't know the methodology of those polling as well as I know the methodologies for American polling.
Okay.
But, there is something up with that.
Yeah.
Just so everyone, my background is in data science and math, so that's why I would, bore you with that stuff.
You could potentially be listened to by someone.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's the Turkish election. We'll keep you up to date on that. We'll talk about the next round when it happens.
Yeah.
Let's go Kemal and the youth of Turkey.
Exactly.
Another interesting thing, Kemal is very much tying himself to the history of Ataturk, the founder of.
Oh.
Yeah, he's very much tying himself to Ataturk.
Okay.
Yeah, because Ataturk was distinctly secular. In a lot of ways, he was not for an Islamic nation the same way that.
Okay.
Yeah. Same way Erdogan is in his current parties. So it's interesting stuff. All right. Next topic. What do we got?
Next up is the mayoral elections.
Yes. We got 2 big mayoral elections to talk about that I think are really interesting. We had a big election day on Tuesday. I say big. It's like a couple. It's like 2 states or something. It's like a big election. But a big enough election to talk about. And there's 2 places that I want to focus on. The city of Jacksonville, Florida, and the city of Colorado Springs in Colorado. In Jacksonville, Florida, they have had a Republican mayor for a decade. It's in Duval County. Duval County voted for Ron DeSantis in the 2022 governor election. So this is a part of that coalition that is iffy on Democrats, likes DeSantis. You know what I mean? That's where this place is.
Okay.
And for the first time in a decade, a Democrat won in Jacksonville by 3 points. She was outspent 4-1.
Wow.
More Republicans showed up to vote. More registered Republicans showed up to vote than Democrats. And the Democrats won independents by a big enough margin that they won Jacksonville.
Wow.
So it wasn't a Democrat turnout thing. It was a Democrats winning over independents. Now, there are some things with this. The Democrat... Well, so professional, Ben. So professional.
God, I'm ruining this podcast.
The Democrat nominee for mayor of Jacksonville was a local TV anchor. She was very popular.
Okay.
So she had some good name recognition going in. But she was still outspent 4-1 and carried it. And that's interesting.
That's impressive. Why do you think that happened?
I think...
If they went DeSantis.
Here's my guess. I think DeSantis overplayed his hand. I think DeSantis pushing for a 6-week abortion ban in Florida is a bad idea. And obviously I think it's a bad idea, but I think it was bad politically.
Okay.
Because all those people who were like, Democrats have gone too far, and Ron DeSantis cleaned up the flood pretty all right. I think he's good. They do the 6-week abortion ban. They're like, I'm not for that.
Yeah.
I don't know what I am, but I'm not that. And then you're expanding the Don't Say Gay bill to cover more and more grades. So I think originally it was only up to 3rd grade, and now it's every grade. in the school system, or at least into high school now. And they're not going to, these independents aren't for that.
Sure.
He overplayed his conservative hand. And we're going to talk about DeSantis in a second here. But
yes.
Yeah, he's overplayed his hand politically. And I think that's what caused this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other election is Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs, this is a big deal. It has never, ever in its history voted for a non-Republican or non-conservative aligned candidate. For the first time, a Democrat won. What this tells me is Colorado is gone. The Republicans need to not invest in Colorado anymore if they want to win. It's not a swing state. Just get out, leave it. You know, you got to spend more money in Texas now because Texas is more of a swing state than Colorado. But what this tells me nationally is that Republicans are still floundering. The 2022 midterm election results were terrible for Republicans nationwide. Terrible. It showed absolute weakness. It showed that parts of this country, the suburban parts of this country, are still disgusted by a lot of their policies, and they haven't won them back yet. They have a lot more work to do if they want to stand a chance in 2024, which I don't think they do currently.
Yeah.
Unless.
Okay.
Next topic.
I didn't think that's how you would introduce it. But so we wanted to talk about DeSantis.
Yeah.
Because this is Governor Ron DeSantis. We've gotten a little bit of feedback from our hundreds of thousands of listeners that
I thought it was millions.
I don't know the exact numbers.
Okay.
That they appreciate they might be less informed, so they appreciate being filled in completely. So I want to make sure we keep hitting that.
Yeah, we got to keep doing that.
So Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, most people expect him to run for president and in the Republican primary against Trump. And I was seeing a bunch of articles this week that he's like gearing up to announce. It's really like getting close to the time where he has to.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. And I guess what there is to talk about is how that will look, but also in the immediate term, he's been in this feud with Disney.
Yeah.
It's kind of a big deal. So Disney has carved out this part of Florida for themselves, and they've lobbied the legislature or the government enough so that basically Disney rules their own plot of land, like unilaterally.
Yeah. Total authority.
They're not governed. DeSantis decided he didn't like that, or I think Disney like criticized his Don't Say Gay bill.
That's right.
And so DeSantis started to lash out at them.
Yep.
It was like they can't be governing themselves. So since then, DeSantis has been trying to gain authority over their district. Disney's been suing or politically maneuvering to make sure that doesn't happen. And the most recent thing that happened yesterday or a couple days ago is Disney withdrew from building a new or investing $1 billion for a new extension of their campus in Florida, which was supposed to create 2,000 new jobs.
Yeah.
Which is a big hit to DeSantis, especially at this time right before he's set to announce a presidential campaign.
That is not what you want going into an announcement like that.
No.
I will say he has recently announced some big endorsements from the state of Iowa. A lot of Iowa politicians came out and endorsed DeSantis, and Iowa is the first state to vote in the presidential primaries. I don't think it will be for the Democrat side anymore. They changed the calendar, but definitely for the Republican side, Iowa goes first. And a lot of Iowa Republicans have endorsed DeSantis, and he rolled out a big list. He was in Iowa over the weekend. He gave a lot of speeches, met a lot of people.
One thing that I saw about that is Trump canceled a rally in Iowa, which was supposed to be just a few minutes away from where DeSantis was speaking, allegedly due to bad weather,
right?
Which played really poorly for Trump because obviously DeSantis talked just right there. So he's worried. Speculation was that Trump was worried about his crowd sizes, not comparing to what
That's interesting.
DeSantis was getting.
That is interesting. You think it'd be the other way around.
Oh, of course.
Right? That's so interesting.
Yeah.
See that? So, but I noticed this week was the first time DeSantis came out and really kind of hit Trump with the only line of attack that I think is going to work. DeSantis said he was asked whether or not Trump won the 2020 election, point blank. And he completely dodged the question because you can't win a Republican primary if you don't think the 2020 election was stolen. So he said, all I know is that we lost in 2018, we lost in 2020, and we lost in 2022, and we need to end the philosophy of losing. And that's you're just calling Trump a loser.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read stuff that seemed even more pointed. That was like, we need to stop looking backwards and worrying about past elections and instead worry about the future. Because all Trump has been talking about is how the election was stolen from him and now he's going to get back in the White House.
Yeah, and I don't think that's going to work for him. I think DeSantis' only path is to criticize Trump's electability.
Exactly.
And then hopefully that's enough to carry him in. Yeah. Do you think DeSantis can beat Trump in a primary?
No.
Me neither.
No. I mean, again, we're talking about the potential unreliability of polling, but Trump is destroying everyone else in polling. Trump has the cult of personality, and DeSantis isn't really offering different policy.
He's not at all.
So it's like there are going to be some Republicans who are never Trump, but they're never Trump for policy-based reasons.
Right.
And so a DeSantis alternative isn't really what they want. DeSantis is trying to win the Trump base that doesn't actually care at all about what Trump is saying. They just care that he's Trump.
Right.
And that he's entertaining and he's this demagogue who has successfully resonated with their feelings of being disenfranchised.
Right. They just view Trump as a fighter and who's, they came for him because they can't get to me. You know what I mean? Like, he is the wall that stands between us and them, and he is taking all the arrows.
Yeah.
That's all that he is to them.
Exactly.
And, DeSantis does not have that. He doesn't.
No.
He's kind of taking, like, it almost, to me, it seems like Ron DeSantis' campaign is fairly similar to the Elizabeth Warren campaign of 2020. So I say this because Ron DeSantis, when he's selling himself, he's going all policy. He's talking about the abortion ban that he did. He's talking about all this other stuff that he's doing. He's talking about how he's cracking down on universities for teaching certain things, Elizabeth Warren, you talk to her, she's like, she has like a plan for everything. That was her shtick in 2020. And that like policy-focused campaigning doesn't work.
That's so sad.
It's so sad.
And that is what I will be talking about later on in this episode.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know what? Yeah, I did kind of set you up for that one. Okay, good. Is there anything else you want to cover on current events?
I mean, we were going to mention the Kentucky governorship.
Oh, you're right. Yes.
That's the last thing. Well, I did also want to ask you, like, because you've talked to me about how you think DeSantis would be a candidate better equipped in a general election.
I do think that. Yeah.
I would love for you to expound upon that.
So my reason for believing that is because I don't think that any Republican nationally has the same crossover appeal to the never-Trumpers and the Trump base that DeSantis has. Nikki Haley, who is another Republican running for the Republican presidency in the primary, does not have the Trump base locked and does not have that high of an approval rating with Republicans generally. Ron DeSantis holds on to the Trump base and ekes out a little bit more of the independents than Trump does. That's kind of why. It's like, sure. I view DeSantis as being, if Trump can get 40% of independents, I think DeSantis can get 45% of independents.
That's fair.
That's what I think.
Yeah, Trump's base will still obviously vote for DeSantis in a general election, but there are some people who are going to be more distinctly off-put by Trump.
Yes.
Who will probably be more like okay with DeSantis.
That's exactly what I think. Yeah.
That makes sense.
I think I know the Jacksonville result kind of throws a little wrench in that because these are the suburbanites and urbanites who voted in DeSantis but now are voting against his party.
Sure.
But I think that's going to go away when it's Biden on the ticket.
Yeah.
A lot. I think once Biden is on the ticket, there's more of a impetus to get him out. Unfortunately, I don't think he's popular enough to.
Yeah, I could also see that as like a Florida specific thing.
Sure.
People outside of Florida will have not cared as much.
Yeah.
Because again, people aren't thinking about policy.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is the governorship is up for election in Kentucky, and there's a Democratic governor right now, which is pretty rare in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. It hadn't happened for a long time, but the Republican primary just ended, and the Trump endorsed nominee has been nominated. Mm-hmm. Candidate has been nominated. And I think we talked about this last week. I'm not sure, but you have at least talked to me about how poorly Trump endorsed candidates, like Let's Go January 6th, election denying candidates have done. So I would think maybe you're optimistic about how this goes for the Democrats.
I am. I think Andy Beshear is actually a very strong Democrat. I think he is a unique. The Beshear name is like a political royalty in Kentucky. His dad was governor, so there's a lot of royalty behind the Beshear name.
Okay.
He is one of those Democrats who can win win a higher percentage of ancestral Democrats in the eastern part of Kentucky. Now, the eastern part of Kentucky is ancestral Democrat, strong coal country, Union, and back in the day, that is strong Democrat appeal.
Okay.
That transitioned. So these people are registered Democrats, but always vote Republican. Andy Beshear is able to get more of a percentage of those people. Instead of losing by 80 to 20, he'll lose by 60 to 40.
I see.
You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think he has a really good shot, and I think he's been a good governor.
Okay.
And it's really hard to lose as an incumbent governor. In 2022, not a single incumbent governor lost in the entire nation.
Huh.
So it's really hard to unseat an incumbent governor.
Okay.
Now, I think the bigger takeaway out of Kentucky nomination here is the Trump candidate won and the DeSantis candidate lost. They endorsed different people.
I see.
And I think that's the big deal.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So now I think that was like a little proxy war. That was a little bit of a battle going on. That was like, who are you going to vote for, the Trump or the DeSantis guy? You know, and they picked the Trump guy.
Yeah, not surprising.
Not surprising at all.
Okay.
All right.
Move on?
Move on.
Book time. So, I said that I would read out the chapters. We're doing book club as a reiteration. We are reading People, Power, and Profits by Joseph Stiglitz. This week we read chapters 4 through 7. So I'll just go. So chapter 4 is called America at War with Itself Over Globalization. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
You start off.
Okay.
You kick it off.
The chapter in general is about how the U.S. mismanaged globalization in a way that hurt workers, that enabled companies to use foreign opportunities for tax evasion. How how imposing tariffs is generally not the right way to go as far as fixing these issues, and specifically in terms of losing jobs to foreign countries. And then he gives a few general points about how we can fix these problems.
Yeah, he doesn't go too far into the prescriptions all the way.
No.
But he does give some kind of standing of where we are and where we are in globalization and kind of what went wrong and a lot of the policy choices we're making that makes it go wrong. Because globalization is supposed to be a beautiful thing. Globalization is supposed to get us goods cheaper, faster, cheaper. Cheaper twice. It's supposed to be super cheaper. More efficient and everything. And the fact that it isn't is a choice. We're deciding to let the benefits of globalization go to fewer people. It doesn't have to, right? We should be able to tax the wealth after it's being generated back into the country. And globalization shouldn't be a tool for these massive companies to avoid their duties and their dues to their nation. Tax havens are the example that we're going to talk about here. Corporations, this era of globalization has encouraged something that you're really interested in, a very fast race to the bottom on corporate tax rates. And all countries are trying to undercut each other to get as much money based in their country. So Google and Apple, both American companies based in Silicon Valley, have, convinced the tax collectors that they live in Ireland and paid 0.005% in tax in 2017. This is, it's like a disregard of the nation that gave them all the benefits to become Google.
Exactly.
Google couldn't have become Google without American infrastructure.
Yes.
Same thing with Apple, right? They couldn't have become what they are without our institutions that all of us paid for. But now they're not paying back into the system.
Yes, it's the exact opposite of what taxes are supposed to do. It's supposed to recoup that money based on what American infrastructure enabled.
And prior to globalization, this wasn't possible, right? This is a new development.
Yes, exactly. And so this is something that we haven't really taken care of. Because we would need really widespread global cooperation to prevent this taxation escape.
Now, Janet Yellen has pushed for a global minimum corporate tax rate. She's pushing for that, but it's not going to be successful because Ireland has no incentive to give this up.
Yeah, exactly.
Ireland has one of the highest GDP per capitas, but they have some of the worst disposable incomes. The only reason that's possible is because companies like this fake being, based in Ireland, so their GDP numbers go up, but there's no actual disposable income being generated for people.
Yeah.
The United States has made a good effort. With the pass of the Inflation Reduction Act, there is now a 15% tax on corporations with profits over $1 billion. So now corporations can't deduct themselves under 15% if they have a profit of over $1 billion, which does affect a lot of companies.
Yeah,
so
that does.
That's good.
I assume we haven't seen whether that's going to be effective.
No, not yet. We'll probably see in the next tax season.
Yeah. Okay. Besides that, what do you think about the impact on workers?
Yeah, I mean that's the real one, right? We're talking about globalization. The real thing you hear is offshoring. That's why Trump was so appealing in Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota and Pennsylvania and Ohio. That's why he's so popular, is because he was able to convince them that, American politicians sold us out to China for their benefit. And Stiglitz kind of goes at that head on. It says it's not true that the United States got taken advantage of by bad trade deals. It wasn't the bad trade deals. It's not that. It was the negotiators were only focused on corporate interests. It's not the trade deal's fault.
Exactly.
It's that the negotiators were representing the corporations there. There were no low-skilled workers at the bargaining table. There were no unions at the bargaining table. The rich nations had representation in these meetings, but the poor from the rich nations didn't. So
yes,
the deck is definitely stacked in favor of rich nations globally, but it's not just stacked in favor of rich nations. It's stacked in favor of the rich nations.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely. One thing that I must say I thought about here was labor is only cheaper overseas or in other countries because they don't have minimum wages, or at least that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah.
So my question is, are we being hypocritical in being very liberal and of course wanting higher minimum wages, but also complaining about all the jobs that we're losing because of globalization, when companies decide to go places where they can pay workers less?
I think there needs to be a balance to this, because there are benefits of globalization that we need to take advantage of. Comparative advantage, that's the main one. But these trade agreements would be better off, and these wouldn't be so much of a problem if union representation was present at these meetings.
That is true.
If union representation from Mexico and from America were both at the table when NAFTA was being signed, we would have come to a very different agreement. Because a lot of our current trade negotiations, and he talks about this, is to increase the standard of living of the other nations. A lot of what we fight for in trade agreements now is improving working conditions for people in Vietnam, improving working conditions for people in Mexico. By increasing the cost of labor in those countries, it makes our place more competitive. And that's what a lot of our trade deals are now focused on. That's what Trump did. And to be honest, in the UNSPCA, United States, Canada, Mexico, whatever. His renegotiation of NAFTA was basically a gift to Mexican workers saying, okay, Mexican workers, you now have more rights, and it's going to be like a little more difficult to exploit you almost.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I like that too. I mean, that's why a lot of Democrats voted for it.
Yeah.
You know, the Amy Klobuchar in Minnesota, who's by no means a socialist, but by no means a conservative, big supporter of the UNSPCA. I think that's what it is. So, no, there's a lot there. But I want to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership that Trump pulled out of. And that was kind of Obama's last push. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was going to encompass 44% of global trade and unite the Pacific on the side of America against a growing Chinese hegemon. That was the goal of the TPP. It did not focus on tariffs, but rather focused on like intellectual property and investment rules. The net effect of this was supposed to be around 0.15% of GDP. It wasn't really supposed to be focused on the economics of it, but more of the politics of it. That was kind of the goal. And it was all there, and it was kind of trying to push for this regulatory harmony that I've been talking about. It's trying to push for that equalizing of regulation between nations. Trump pulled out of it. At the time, I was for pulling out of it.
Okay.
I was afraid it would do the same thing as NAFTA, put jobs to Mexico, and then we would just be putting jobs to Vietnam. I think I've changed on that, and I don't think I'm against the TPP in ideology. I'm against the TPP in its practicality, because unions still weren't at this meeting. You know what I mean? I don't think I would be against the renegotiation of a Trans-Pacific Partnership equivalent.
Okay.
But I thought that was interesting.
Okay, so I see, like, here in the book, he specifically says, if the TPP and other recent agreements are not essentially about trade, what are they about? Investment, intellectual property, regulations, and a host of issues that are of concern to business. I think I was kind of confused about this part. Like, what is it changing about those issues? What is the point?
Well, tighter intellectual property rights, meaning that those other nations can't steal technology from U.S. companies.
Okay.
And make bootleg versions of their products.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the intellectual property part. What other ones were you talking about?
It said investment, regulations. It says, and a host of issues that are of concern to businesses.
Yeah, I don't know the host of issues. That's pretty broad. But the regulation we talked about, and then the investments is just making capital flows easier.
Okay, between countries.
Between countries.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
This does talk about how there are good versions of, so protectionism is the ideology of basically of making globalization more difficult, of imposing tariffs, taxing exports. One of the things that Stiglitz gets at is since companies were at the table, they prevented specific kind of aspects of protectionism that would have actually been helpful to the consumer.
Sure.
And a really good example that he uses is labeling GMOs,
right,
which Europeans really wanted. And the U.S. kind of just forced our square peg into a round hole and said, no, we're going to make it so that we don't have to label those because we're worried about them reducing sales. Right. And the Europeans were like, oh, yeah, we get that they could reduce sales. That's kind of the point. Yeah, we want to let that happen. So even though prices might have been, or certainly were able to be reduced in some ways, because the U.S., and Stiglitz's argument is because the U.S. was kind of the winner and had the big stick in all of these negotiations, there were still a lot of outcomes that weren't great for the consumer. Yeah,
a ton. And I think focusing on protectionism is going to be important for a little while here. One of the big things Trump ran on the first time around was the trade deficit. You heard that all the time. Trade deficit, the trade deficit, the trade deficit. We have a trade deficit. Trade deficit with Mexico is the largest it's ever been. Stiglitz gives us a really interesting explanation of the trade deficit that I've never heard before, and it makes perfect sense. And I'm just going to kind of read the bullet points out, because I think it's important to kind of get that. Overall trade deficits is equal to what a trade deficit is if Mexico is sending us $100 worth of goods and we send Mexico only $50 worth of goods, our country is net negative 50 in sales. So that's what a trade deficit is. So overall trade deficits is equal to the shortfall of domestic savings over domestic investment. When I first read that, that didn't make sense to me.
I got lost here as well, so hopefully you can help me.
So that didn't make any sense to me. What does our domestic savings and domestic investment have to do with this? But I think he gives a really good explanation. Policies that affect these metrics have the largest effects on the deficit. Okay, so domestic savings divided by domestic investment.
What do you conceptualize as domestic savings?
Domestic savings is all the money that you have in the bank plus all the money that I have out in the bank plus all the money that every corporation and every other person has in the bank.
Okay.
So so if we have more capital investment than capital savings, than domestic savings, capital must come in from abroad to make up for the lack of capital saved at home. Money's got to come from somewhere.
True.
We need that money has to exist for us to lend it out. Foreign capital is then exchanged at home for local capital. So we take pounds, buy more dollars with it, and then that drives up the demand for local capital. So now dollars are becoming more expensive because the American government needs more dollars to pay for its things. So now the American government is in the process of buying more money.
Okay.
So then American goods and services are more expensive than European goods, causing the decline in U.S. exports. Does that make sense? Because now that the dollar is more expensive
compared to the rest of the world,
yes. And that's why China is always trying to devalue its currency. And I've never put that together, but that made perfect sense to me.
That is very interesting.
And that's why domestic savings, how we can deal with that is, well, the best way to deal with the trade deficit, he argues, is to not have a deficit in our budget. Because not having a deficit in our budget will increase the amount of capital the U.S. would have to bring in from abroad to finance. If we decrease our deficit, we don't have to use as much foreign capital
to pay
for stuff.
Our interest.
To pay our interest, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And if the U.S.
I see.
Yes.
Wait. Okay, but reducing our deficit. So I'm trying to just get the math here. So if we have a big deficit, it means we're borrowing a lot of foreign cash.
Yeah.
Borrowing a lot of foreign money, which should devalue our money, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it increases the value of our money because we're taking our foreign money and then buying dollars with it abroad.
Oh.
Yes, because we need more dollars.
Yes.
So we're taking dollars from outside of our country, bringing them back to our country. Now there's less dollars for the rest of the world to play with.
Sure.
So now our goods all over the world cost more.
Okay.
So he argues that Trump did a terrible job on the trade deficit, specifically because his 2017 tax bill exploded the deficit by insane proportions during an economic boom that didn't need to have this deficit. And that's what caused, our trade deficit to get even so worse. And I thought I never thought about that, but I thought it was an awesome explanation.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah, that was really good.
It's not intuitive, but it makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I feel like I have more here. We already talked about intellectual property. I mean, he specifically uses the example of Big Pharma for this, which makes sense. I feel like that's kind of
listen,
the pivot point for IP always.
Intellectual property for pharmaceuticals is it seems like a war crime.
Yeah.
It honestly seems like a war crime. We're going to go tell nations in the middle of Africa that they can't produce medication that they can't afford because we want to make money off of it. Is that really what we're going to do? Moderna not giving away its IP rights, intellectual property rights to countries in Africa so that they could produce the vaccine to fight COVID. Yeah. Come on, man. That's a war. That's
broken.
That should be a criminal offense.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Right? I can't imagine, but so yeah.
Okay. And then I guess
the next thing I have is talking about global cooperation.
I have some of that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems that the rules-based system of post-World War II is going away. That it seems like it's over.
Yeah.
America's kind of turning in on itself, as we've discussed in private, not on the podcast, but America's kind of turning in on itself. It's kind of rejecting being so involved. Ukraine kind of changed that, but overall, America just isn't as interested in abroad.
Yeah.
And now China is, I think, positioned in a better way to take advantage of a trade war than the United States is. I think the Chinese political system, because it has more control over its economy, it'll very quickly be able to direct and help industries suffering from international troubles. And there's examples of that, but I think that is something that the U.S. is going to have to reckon with. China has wanted to decouple from U.S. exports for a while, and like the Trump tariff trade war kind of expedited that process, right?
Yeah,
and that's a very interesting end of this era of Chinese cooperation.
Yeah, it's interesting too because the idea is that we're helping America. Like the whole name of the plan is America First. It's like we're going to bring these manufacturing jobs back to our shores, but instead we're promoting a Chinese agenda, and just pressing on the gas pedal for them.
Right, and China has a lot of its problems that we'll talk about at some point in the show, but also what's important to remember is when countries like no longer produce things in China, that doesn't mean they produce things in the United States.
Exactly.
It means they produce them in Vietnam or Malaysia.
Yeah.
And there was a really interesting article in The Economist that was talking about this as the other Asia. And China was like the first Asia or whatever. This is, it's very Eurocentric and Western-centric terms that I don't agree with, but this is just how the article was written. And now it's like it was tracking the job movements from China to Vietnam to Malaysia to Singapore to the Philippines.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of it because these companies aren't going to come back to the U.S. They're going to come back to Vietnam that are better aligned with the United States.
That makes sense. There has been an investigation. I don't know if it's the FTC that's doing it, but into some Chinese companies that have actually been circumventing tariffs by funneling their products through these companies.
That's right. I forgot about that.
And as far as I know, the investigation hasn't wrapped, but they put out like a preliminary or intermediate report during it, in which I think they confirmed that about half of the companies that they were investigating, it was only a few, because there was only a few big companies, but they were doing this. So they were exporting products to Vietnam first, and then shipping them out to the U.S. or to
totally
other
avoiding
European
the tariff
countries.
completely, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Which just goes to show that this probably isn't the right way to do it.
No, I don't think tariffs are ever the right way to do it. Now, there's a senator in Congress now, Josh Hawley from Missouri. It was pushing for increased tariffs on Chinese goods that would pretty much, what is the number? Like at least triple them, right? Triple the average?
Quadruple
The
it's
average.
Like 11% to 41%.
There you go. Almost quadruple the average.
Yeah.
Tax on Chinese imports, and that's just a terrible idea.
I mean, 41% is insane. Yeah, well, it hasn't gotten a lot of
support
and news attention, but the one article I read was just like, oh yeah, it's just gonna raise costs enormously on all normal family goods. Like that's the only effect.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to encourage American production. I just don't think it will.
Yeah.
I just don't think it will. I think it's just going to make things more expensive. I don't think that American manufacturing is coming back, and fighting it through protectionism is a fool's errand. And I think that's important to understand. I think what's going to happen in America in the 21st century is we need to, and this is kind of 2 chapters ahead here, but transitioning to a service economy.
Yeah.
And listen, we're going through that transition whether we like it or not. We need a government that is in the game of that transition, who's facilitating that transition.
Yes.
We don't want the transition to just hit us from all sides and leave a bunch of people behind. We want a transition where we're being carried there, not dropped there.
And we don't want it where the government is trying to dig its heels in, as we are clearly still going in that direction.
Right.
Because it doesn't work.
Right. And we might talk about this later, but because we're talking about it now, we probably don't have to touch on it for so long. But we transitioned from an agricultural society to an industrial society, kind of around 1920s Great Depression, and that kind of was one of the causes for it. One of the technological advancement made agricultural goods very cheap.
Exactly.
So then urban workers were able to buy a lot of products from farmers, but farmers weren't making any money.
Exactly.
But a bunch of farmers went bankrupt, and then the farmers couldn't buy the products that were being produced in the cities. And only because World War II got farmers into the cities making these manufactured goods, a government intervention is World War II, right? World War II is, us directing industrial capacity and having an industrial policy. That's the only way we got out of it. So,
yeah. But on the other hand, I think this is an interesting time to bring up the CHIPS Act, which might be the right way to do this.
I think it might be.
The carrot instead of the stick,
yeah.
right? Because the stick makes it so that the stick being tariffs is that companies are going to find their ways to get around it.
Yeah.
Whereas with the CHIPS Act, it's provided a ton of incentives for companies to produce semiconductors in the U.S. rather than specifically in China. It has specific language to prevent production in potentially hostile countries.
We should do a deep dive on the chip war.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But I just the point is it's spurred a ton of investment in U.S. semiconductor manufacturing. And so the U.S. probably needs more, and Stiglitz would probably agree with this because he loves government investment in industry, is that we need more incentivization if we want manufacturing to come back to the U.S., especially for things like clothes and toys, which China dominates right now.
Yeah. So when we're talking about this end of American and Chinese cooperation, he brings up this interesting point of, can countries with such different types of government be cooperating trade partners? Is it possible? Can less free societies have such an overwhelming advantage in certain areas that is it possible to compete with them fairly? The example he brings up is artificial intelligence, and China has much less data rights than the United States and much less than Europe, right? So the Chinese capability to collect data sets on its people is way better than the U.S. or Europe, and Europe also has their complaints against us. Europe says that the United States has prison labor, which is 5% of U.S. industrial labor.
Yeah.
And that gives us an unfair advantage. So we're a less free system. Like if you want to say Europe is the most free, then America, and then China, right? Then China, Russia, you can put at the bottom there. But that's kind of the order. And so Europe has their problems with us, and we have the problems with the Chinese. Are these comparable systems that can trade fairly? Another one is the minimum wage. Europe says the United States minimum wage is so low. How are we supposed to compete with your workers internationally? Yeah. You're paying your workers literally so little that they can't afford an apartment, and we're expected to compete with their products?
Yeah. It's interesting. I like the ideological conversation because on the one hand, it's hard for me to believe that they won't kind of overlook the values differences and continue to cooperate. And Stiglitz doesn't really come to a conclusion. I'm reading him right here. All he says is, we can't force others to adopt our regulatory system, nor should we be forced to adopt theirs. And it will be a lot better for all of us if these rules are global, multilateral, and can be agreed upon by all countries.
Well, I think, I put a note there. I highlighted those two sentences exactly. And then my note was, how are these two statements not completely contradictory? Because I feel like they literally can't both be...
Yeah.
They can't both exist.
No.
What do you mean that we can't force other countries to conform, but also there needs to be more rules that are agreed upon?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I have always loved the idea of a trade policy based on ideology. We choose to trade with the partners.
I totally agree.
Who have the same values.
Oh, you're such an ideologue, Ben.
I am.
I love it. I totally agree with that. Well, I used to not agree with that. I used to be for trade with everybody because I was of the belief that if we trade with everybody, they're all going to liberalize because our economies will be so much superior that the only way that they could the only way that they could be competitive is to make our system of government. But guess what? We did that with Russia, and then they killed 300,000 people.
Oh, I was going to say we did that with China.
Oh, or we did that with China, right?
Yeah.
So
China is a glaring example. That is exactly why we tried to get so integrated with China, and they just spat.
Well, the Germans tried to get so integrated with Russia because they were like, look, well, if we literally have our gas supplied tied together, you're never going to invade us. Yeah. And then Russia's like, I don't care about any of the money. I just want the land and the prestige. And the German realpolitik crowd is just like, that wasn't in my textbook. I don't understand.
Yeah.
And it's like,
No.
it's not the point.
Yeah.
It's about power.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and trade is also about power.
Exactly.
And when we trade with people, we give them our power. And I think how we go about trading with China in the future, how we go about trading with Russia after all this, how we reintegrate Russia back into the system, how we deal with China now. Well, we're kind of dealing with China now by using the other Asia, for lack of a better term.
Yes.
By saying, okay, our imports from Vietnam are going to go up, our imports from Malaysia are going to go up, our imports from the Philippines, we're going to have closer ties to these countries. You know,
Sure.
That's kind of our method to avoid them. But yeah. So, and again, Chinese state capitalism has proven incredibly effective, unfortunately.
Yes.
And the third world is now looking to them as a possible leader.
Yes.
All the stands.
Exactly. I mean,
All
the
the
Belt and
stands.
Road, they've been investing like crazy.
Yeah.
And there are strings attached, and there's a specific example with Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
which I don't know if we
classic.
talked about last week.
We didn't.
But China invested in Sri Lankan infrastructure, and then Sri Lanka had an economic crisis, and China came in and they like possessed at least one of their ports.
Yeah.
And
They brought in Chinese workers, didn't use Sri Lankan workers.
Yeah, so it's not all great, but for countries that can pay off their Chinese loans, like they're kind of it's a loving relationship. It's not a needing, fear-based relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's going to be interesting. Now, I again, how can we have free trade with a country that has a different economic model? I don't even imagine how it would be possible to trade for the United States and a nation like the Soviet Union to have, like, imagine the Soviet Union was still around, right? How would the Soviet Union and the United States actually have a free and open trade relationship with such a totally two system? Like, the Soviet Union was such a different system of economic organization.
I mean, I can conceptualize it.
You can?
If you think about communism, just in general, there are still companies, basically. They're all government companies. They're all owned by the public, but all of those entities can still just trade with the U.S. Right? Because I think about it from the individual countries' perspectives.
Yeah.
Like, the U.S. is thinking, we're just trying to get these goods at this price.
Yeah.
And so we're going to pay that money, and if we get our goods, we're happy. And the Soviet Union is going to think the same thing as far as selling those goods or buying from the Americans.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to make two other points just about like general fixes he comments on. So first of all is that Stiglitz wants American trade agreements or to have investment agreements that ensure that American companies are not discriminated against.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So I'm blanking. What did I have to say about that?
Listen, the only thing I have to say about fixing globalization is putting unions at the table. I think that's the big one, because right now, current international trade rules are negotiated through the U.S. trade representatives, the USTR, and that's literally basically corporate lobbyists making the rules for themselves. You know, that's currently where we're at. We need more labor representation there. And I think that actually goes a long way.
Totally.
And a fiscal policy that is guaranteeing full employment at home is also a big deal. We need a fiscal policy that is saying, like, we are going to make sure that you are always going to have a job. We're going to always be investing in our economy to increase your human capital, as we discussed last week, that you're going to be prepared to enter the labor market, stuff like that.
Yeah,
you know,
that's a huge point of a future chapter that we will talk about very soon as well.
All right.
And then the one other thing is closing these tax loopholes that it seemed like we talked about a while ago now.
Yeah.
But it is doable. And with raising the budget of the IRS, which we did mention last week,
we all love,
it should be done.
Fund the tax police.
Yeah, exactly. We need those. We
Fund
need that
the
money.
tax police, please.
Yeah. All right, chapter 5.
Finance and the American crisis.
I loved this.
This was awesome.
I loved this.
It was the best.
Yeah. So, this is all about how the financial sector, the banking sector, has accrued a ridiculous amount of market power.
Ridiculous.
And are exerting it to the detriment of the American people. As a as a reminder, market power is the power that companies get by making it harder for other companies to enter, more difficult for competition to be had against them. And in the case of banks have market power because of how reliant the U.S. system has become on them, and how complicit governments have become in backing them.
Right. The notion too big to fail, right? The classic phrase that we've heard countless times over the last decade and a half, too big to fail. The banks are too big to fail. When you're too big to fail, that means that you have captured such a large amount of market power that the collective action of the people is completely unable to reject your requests.
Yes.
They have to fall in line with you because you hold the self-destruct button. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to start, like, one of the first few sentences that he writes in this chapter that I quoted and I loved. Mm-hmm. And I've always thought this about the financial sector, like, in so many words myself. But he says, a sector that should have been a means to an end, the more efficient production of goods and services, has become an end in itself.
So good.
I love that.
So good.
The finance sector doesn't do anything in and of itself. Like, it creates tools for investment, but that is all it is doing. It's opening up channels for money to move.
Right. So what's the goal of finance? The goal of finance is intermediation. Mm-hmm. It is to bring people who have excess funds to those who need funds. Mm-hmm. That's the job of finance, is to say, oh, you have $500 that you don't need. You need $500 to start a business. Let me give this $500 to this guy. Let him start a business. When he recoups that $500 plus some interest through his business venture, we'll give it back to you.
Yes.
That's intermediation. That's what a bank is supposed to do. But we're going to shave some of that $550 off, and we're going to keep that for ourselves. Mm-hmm. That's what a bank is supposed to do. Totally lost the plot.
Yes.
Totally lost it. We have gone so deep. And why we've gone so deep, honestly, a lot of our smartest and most talented people have gone into it and have made it a game. Because it's a very profitable game. So,
we just had a little technical difficulty.
Ben, unfortunately, ran out of space on his phone that we're recording this on.
We need to make this very successful very quickly.
Yes.
So we can upgrade our production quality.
He had 6 gigabytes of Apple Podcasts downloaded.
Okay. I'm going to be completely transparent here. It is from a few years ago. They were community podcasts, as in podcasts talking about the TV show Community and analyzing the episodes.
That's
5.5 gigabytes. I had 48 episodes downloaded.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
But we're on now, so we have 6 gigs left of data. Hopefully, that's enough to get through the end of this podcast.
Listen, we if we have enough information right now to add another 6 gigabytes of airtime, that's extremely impressive. That is 48 episodes of a Community's podcast.
That's a good point, but that's only audio.
Oh, that's only audio.
Yeah, video is a whole different.
Okay, you just had a shit on whatever I was talking about. Is that what you just had to do? You had to one-up me?
Yes.
Okay.
You idiot.
Where were we at?
We were talking about how finance has gotten way too big for its britches.
We defined intermediation.
Yes.
Okay. And it's become a means, right? It's become a means, right? Mm-hmm. So
it's become an end.
No, it's become an end of itself.
It's supposed to be a means.
That's right. So after 2008, we passed the Dodd-Frank bill, which was supposed to be, which was a tighter regulation of the banking markets, putting more pressure on these banks to have better behavior. 2018, Trump's in office, a lot of these regulatory things totally removed.
So as far as I know, this says a lot were removed. His language technically is the vast majority of banks were removed from the tighter oversight that had enacted.
That's right.
So I know a little bit about this because it really came into play with the recent banking crisis.
That's where I was going with it. You read my mind.
Okay, so as far as I know, the threshold for the amount of assets that a bank had to hold to be subject to these new regulations was $200 billion.
Yeah.
And it was reduced to $50 billion. Mm-hmm. And so a whole host of banks were in that 50 to 200 billion range, including Silicon Valley Bank, including First Republic Bank.
Exactly.
These banks that have just recently failed after a run. And other banks, of course, are also avoiding that
You
regulation.
know what Trump raised it to after the 50?
No, it was that was part of the 2018 move. It moved it from 200 to 50. So the threshold that like banks between 50 and 200
I
now
understand.
didn't have
Got
to.
it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So
Oh, I said that wrong.
Yes.
I said 200 to 50. It was moved from 50
50
to 200.
that makes more sense.
Yeah, my bad.
No, you got it. Okay, cool. So that's a perfect example of, honestly, capitalism kind of eating itself,
Yeah.
right? Because like that regulation actually would have helped with these companies rather than, destroy them. But anyway, a lot of that has been rolled back in the Trump era now. And Dodd-Frank, we have to emphasize, did not go far enough. Dodd-Frank still was the law of the land after the first 3 years, from 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. 91% of all gains in the economy went to the top 1%.
Yep.
This is a failure of banking regulation. This is a failure of punishing finance for what they did to us.
The punishment is a huge deal here. So like
This is where the stick needs to come in. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
This is when the carrot isn't enough. We need the stick.
Yeah.
And Obama didn't pick up the stick.
Yeah, well, when it's retrospective, of course, it definitely has to be the stick. And what Stiglitz says is like, if you're asking what should have happened, well, obviously some people should have went to jail. But as far as the companies, the banks themselves, they should have paid out every bit of their assets to the people who were losing their money, to the people that they had conned with these crappy products, financial products that they knew.
Right.
And there's an example that he uses about Goldman Sachs selling products that they were shorting at the same time because they were designed to go down in value.
So shorting is when you're, just so the audience understands, shorting is when you're betting on something to fail. So they were selling a product to somebody and then betting on it to fail. And, and that's not even to talk about how in bed the credit agencies were with all of this.
Yes.
So listen, 2008 is a whole other thing. Maybe it can be a deep dive one day.
Yeah, I mean, watch The Big Short.
Oh, watch The Big Short.
Is what I'll say.
Yeah, watch The Big Short.
It is amazing.
Yeah. Watch The Big Short. And if you have, you know what? The book I was going to reference is being used to prop up his phone, so I can't talk about it because I forgot the name of it. So maybe we'll put it in the description of the video.
Is there any chance it's one of these few where the cover
not.
is facing
It's
out?
not.
Damn.
It's so funny. Okay.
Tough.
So another way that the banks have really lost their original purpose is the lack of money that's being invested into SMEs, or small and medium-sized businesses. Banks found lending to these people way less profitable than lending to consumers. It has become much more profitable for banks to give someone a credit card and charge them 30% interest for buying a new chair that they don't have the money for, rather than giving the money to a small business to eventually make a profit, because that's too much of a long-term investment.
Yes.
Right? They need the short-term growth, the short-term capital increases. They need that short-term interest rate, and that's what you get from a credit card.
Yeah.
And in 2016, loans to SMEs, or small and medium-sized businesses, that's the last time I'm going to say the acronym. It's SMEs from now on. Loans to SMEs were 16% below what they were in 2008, and it was even worse in Europe. So banks have kind of gave up on this aspect of the social contract.
Yeah. And I like this point because with it has necessarily come a shift in societal perspectives, in people's ideas that it's okay to spend more than you have. It's okay to rack up that credit card debt. It's normalized. And this is also a wider point that he makes about the culture around banking being something slimier, and how it used to be about you had your banker as one of the most trustworthy people in the community.
Yeah.
And
someone who wanted to see everyone succeed because he's loaning out the money, right?
Yes. And now it's the exact opposite, and they are specifically predatory. They're slimy. Like, bankers are people that are trying to take from you rather than support you and help you grow.
Right. Right. A credit card is not helping anybody grow.
No.
It's not helping you grow.
No.
You're not financing your business on your credit card. At least I hope you're not. If you are, stop doing that.
Yeah.
So The credit card is specifically to just target poor people who are having trouble paying for their necessities, or people who are overconsumptuous in our current society. Right?
Yes. And the thing is, because like people see society where that does feel more like the norm, it's like they almost get lulled into this, I don't know if it's a sense of security more than a sense of almost like I should be spending more. Right. I should be able to spend on all these things. Yeah. So I'll just borrow from my credit card.
Right.
I'll get the now. I'll get the immediate pleasure. Yeah. And I won't worry about the long-term
best
effects.
Investment you can make. This is a little personal. I can't give financial advice because I don't think that's illegal or something. But like, if you have any credit card debt, the best investment you can make is paying it off. So just if you have credit card debt out there, please pay off all your credit card debt before you do anything else.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So because banks are no longer doing this, other institutions need to come up and do it. And yes, other institutions need to do this. And there are institutions that are doing this on the international level. BRICS, the New Development Bank, which is a combination of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They're not really like a whole economic bloc, but they do share some economic investment. And the World Bank have stepped in to loan money to developing countries that need that long-term investment that private banks have just said we're not doing anymore. Private banks have I don't want to say stepped off totally, but they're just not as interested in doing these long-term investments with these developing countries.
They won't fulfill the demand that's there.
Yeah, they won't.
Yeah.
They won't. I think that's... Oh, this is another one that I think we should talk about too. Banks are finding profits in facilitating mergers and acquisitions.
I had that down. Yeah. And I think that's... So this idea about banks kind of being slimy now, it works in a lot of different ways. So in terms of them, they have market power, and it also tends to be profitable for them to propagate market power.
Yes.
And so they do that through, they encourage mergers and acquisitions because they can make hundreds of millions of dollars just from facilitating like any given merger or acquisition. They help company avoid taxes because they make a ton of money from that.
A ton of money from avoiding taxes.
Because, like you said at the beginning, like they are designed to win this financial game.
Yeah.
They are the institutions in our society that are most dependent on increasing companies' market power in increasing their individual profits, and it doesn't matter at all that those companies are taking from others, are exploiting others to make those profits.
Yes. And I think what's notable here is money is not banks are not bringing money from the household sector into the corporate sector, but now it's kind of reversed, right? So now it's money going from the corporate sector into the household sector. And this is what I mean by this. This is, I think, one of the biggest issues of our current economy. Companies are buying their own stock in a pace that has not been seen before in American history.
Yes.
It used to be illegal. After the Reagan administration, it was no longer illegal. Now, buying your own stock means a company buying its own stock. It's fairly self-explanatory, but what that does is it increases your company's stock price by a lot. In most cases, it's probably the best investment your company can make to return profits to shareholders, which in our current capitalist economy is the goal of these institutions, of these firms, right?
Yes.
So companies not only are buying their own stock, but they're borrowing from banks to buy their stock. And this came to a head. This is something that was kind of going under the radar. It just wasn't that highly talked about in economic circles, but March 2020 put it all to a head, because March 2020 was a massive financial crash. This was COVID, right? Cash infusions from the Federal Reserve that stopped the market crash in March of 2020. So after March 2020, all these stock prices plummeted, and Federal Reserve threw a bunch of cash, bought a ton of corporate bonds, saying, here's all the money you need to pay whatever you need to get your stock price back up. And all those corporations did was buy their own stock with the money that the Federal Reserve gave them. Not only that, the corporate debt that was occurred was from buying their stock. Walmart went into debt buying their stock their stock price plummeted. So the Federal Reserve said, oh man, here's more money to go and buy your stock again. And unbelievable. And the Republican tax law of 2017 led to a massive increase in stock buybacks. And this is another aspect of the financialization of the economy that I think is like so vital, because this is totally rent seeking. This is the definition of rent seeking.
Yes.
This is not money that's being put into the tangibles. This is not money that's going to the increasing, labor to make more products, to make better infrastructure. This is not money that's going to that. It's money that's going into the game. It's going into the end of the financial game, and
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I have anything else to say.
I have two more things.
I mean, I have stuff to say on this, but on that specific point. What I would probably move on to right now is the government connection to banks. So in the wake of the financial crisis of 2008, the government felt like they had to step in and bail out all these banks. And what has happened since is the banks have kind of just become more and more confident. Like, they have to take less and less of the liability or the responsibility on for backing the loans that they give out, because they know that governments are going to back them. And so at this point, it's gotten so egregious that banks won't even back mortgages that they give out. Like, they need the government to say that if they're saying mortgages are too risky, and so the government needs to be able to back them, otherwise they won't even give out mortgages.
So why should they be able to profit off those mortgages? If that's what kills me. That's what kills me about this whole financial sector, is why are we taking on all the risk for a bunch of these guys to make a shit ton of money?
Yeah, and Stiglitz keeps using the term one-sided bet, and that is all that the banks are making. Mortgages are one way they're doing it. He also talks about these really high stakes, or not high stakes, but very expensive quote-unquote gambles they're making with credit default swaps, where they're betting on what the market is going to do. Like, they're betting on what other companies or markets in other countries, whether they're going to go down or up. And it's a one-sided bet, because if they lose a lot of that money, they're just going to be backed by the government. So really, our government is taking on all of the risk here and getting none of the reward. And I think the United States government should start being in the game, and we should have a sovereign wealth fund that is basically a hedge fund for the people. And that we can be playing this game. And we have our own hedge fund of the United States that's playing the game and playing it well. I like that a lot. Honestly, the more I read about this stuff, whether from Stiglitz or just in a lot of what I'm learning about right now, I'm feeling like the answer to a lot of it is just to have a public competitor.
A public option?
All of these industries.
Literally a public option?
Yeah.
And look, this is a really interesting stat that I think is very emblematic of it. Like, in 1945, the financial sector was 2.5% of GDP. 2008 got to 8%. Yeah, this is what's happening right now.
That's
so
huge.
Much of our money is being funneled through this end.
Yes.
That's
doing nothing.
It's adding no value. It's not just intermediation anymore. The value of the financial sector is intermediation. The value of the financial sector is retirement for people, right? That's the value of these things. And it's just crazy. But when we were talking about the backlog thing, you're talking about the backstop, the one-sided bet that the United States will always guarantee you. During the 2007 crash, really, Hank Paulson, who was the Treasury Secretary under George Bush, he made the point to Congress saying that we need to be careful about what we do, because we don't want to create a moral hazard. Now, you're not going to see me agreeing with many Republicans, but that sentiment, we don't want to create a moral hazard, was spot on.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what we did post-2008. Obama and the Democrats allowed, and Timothy Geithner, who was the Treasury Secretary under Obama in those first few years, who was the president of the New York Federal Reserve, he and his decision to backstop these banks, to not make them go under, to not make them face the consequences, to make us pay for their consequences, and not even for the banks to repay the mortgages for all those people who suffered because of this.
Yeah.
The fact that we let it go through that is why that 8% number about how much GDP goes through the system hasn't changed. And that's why. And that's why a lot of things. That's why Trump is elected. That's why Republicans are popular. That's why the Tea Party happened.
Yep.
There's a lot of, obviously there's a bunch of racial undertones of just flat out racism for the Tea Party. But you go back and you watch the videos, it is so much about the banks being bailed out.
Yes, absolutely. I think I really wonder how much of those bailouts came just out of baseless fears.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if we had drained Goldman Sachs for everything it had, for all of its assets, and paid out the people that it had scammed, essentially, or whichever other banks were, or Wells Fargo is another example, that were at risk of failure. Is it really true that there wouldn't be other banks to step into their place and to take on people's deposits?
Yeah, that would have been true.
And grow? Of course it would have been true. It seems like it would have been true, but it's weird to me because I think of Obama as a type of politician who would have been happy with seeing that happen, but was too scared to allow for the chance for it to happen.
That's a good point. I would not, if I was in his shoes, and if I could go back in time, and I was the president in 2008, I would have nationalized the banking system for a while. I would have said, all right, you guys don't know what you're doing. You have caused too much pain. All of the things that you were supposed to benefit us all failed. All the gains of retirement funds, they're all gone. All the games you played suffered by hurt too many. You don't have the right to play anymore. We need to watch you to a T. And you are only going to perform the actions that are socially responsible. And maybe we can give you more leeway as time goes on, but for a while, we're going to watch you like a hawk.
Yeah, because it's like, what are you doing for society? What good are you providing? What value are you providing?
The only thing I can think of, would be increasing retirement funds. That's the only thing I can think of.
Sure.
That's the only thing I got, right? That
Okay.
if the financial sector does such a good job playing the game, that everyone's 401k goes up. That's the only thing I can think of. But how many Americans even have a 401k?
Yeah.
And then how many Americans correctly fund their 401k or can afford to correctly fund their 401k?
Yeah.
And what is really the benefit? Not enough. Not enough to justify all this pain.
Well, again, I think you're right that banks can be valuable. Just you can think about them as wealth growing institutions in general, but it doesn't help at all to have them backstopped.
No reason for them to be backstopped at all.
Yeah.
No, I think the Silicon Valley Bank bailout, quote unquote, because it really wasn't a bailout, was better than the 2008 bailouts, in my opinion, because Silicon Valley Bank did fail. Everyone got fired. It no longer exists.
Yeah.
But all the depositors were secured.
True.
Now, that's a better version, but still not what I would like to see. I think the FDIC thing of $250,000, if you have less than $250,000, the FDIC will make sure and guarantee that deposit. Should that deposit be infinity? I don't think so. No, I don't think it should be infinity. I don't think you should be able to have $20 million in a bank and have it always backstop, because then what's the point of the bank existing?
See, I've heard the argument for it to be infinity because...
Then what's the bank's responsibility?
The bank's responsibility ends up being to itself and its employees, because you have a problem like SVB, where if it fails, all of the people working there still lose their jobs and their money. But the depositors still need to be protected. And so I think what we're seeing with an SVB is that this 250,000 number is kind of bullshit anyways. Like, these deposits are going to be backed up. And the reason that you should increase that number past 250,000 is because because the bank run happens because of the fear. Yeah. So you want to reduce the amount of fear that can go into the system to potentially break it.
That makes sense. I think an infinity number would be effective at stopping bank runs. I think that's fair.
Exactly.
And bank runs is when everyone tries to pull money out of the bank, so then banks don't have the money necessary to, give all the money back to all of its depositors.
Because banks never hold the amount of money.
They have
that's
fractional
deposited.
reserve banking, so they only keep about 20%. Yeah.
This is also a point that he made, is that banks have held less and less of deposits in their reserve and have become more and more profitable from that.
There's also a trade-off to that. Lower percentages for fractional reserve banking leads to higher economic growth because there's more money in the system now. There's more money. That's actually where wealth gets created. Wealth doesn't get created at the printing press and the Federal Reserve or with the Treasury. It gets created when bank loans money to somebody. That's where money gets made. So when it goes down, there is actually economic prosperity there. But for how long and what's the total average of that, I don't know. But yeah, I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there are benefits, but of course the risk goes up
too high
with that as
too
well.
high. So the last thing I had, the government must be in the business of providing small business loans for long-term investments. Now, this is what comes at my core, and one of the things I'm most passionate about on the federal level is for people to have a postal banking alternative to current banks. You should be able to have a checking account and a savings account at your local post office. You should be able to apply for personal loans at your post office. You should be able to apply for small business loans at your post office. You should be able to, the post office should function as a bank of the United States that will allow you to do small transactions, basic transactions, not play any financial games, just be the intermediary that we all want and we all need.
Interesting.
That's what should happen.
Because of safety? Because
of safety.
Okay.
But also because they're not investing into these small businesses. They're not investing into the SMEs. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And we need
greater supply
of money there. We need more capital. It's going to be freer to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
And
makes sense.
I don't like the idea of profiting off of so many fees for the poor. It's very expensive to be poor, and I'll say that a lot on the show. Overdraft fees should be illegal.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and at a postal bank, overdraft fee wouldn't exist.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
I do like that.
You ready for the next chapter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The challenge of new technologies.
I liked this one. This is so topical.
Insane.
For right now.
I can't believe this was even written so many years ago now.
I know. He's talking so much about the challenge of AI.
Yes.
And like he's scared of AI development of the past 5 years. And this was written in 2018. So this is written 5 years ago.
Imagine what he's thinking now.
It's crazy. So he's talking about, again, this is a backdrop of overall explaining all of these 3 chapters are explaining why basically our income and wealth inequality. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Why our financial inequality has grown so much. And so globalization is one of those. The financial industry increasing market power is one of those. And now he talks about technology.
Right.
Because it's always been a question. So he brings up that there's this fear that labor replacing machines will drive down wages and increase unemployment, which of course makes sense because it's like these machines are going to do the jobs that people were previously doing. They're cheaper than people once you have it installed, you don't have to keep paying it a wage. And it's easier because you don't have to have an HR department or
machines don't go on strike, right?
Exactly. So that's a big part of the challenge. I guess I'll just kick it off right there.
Yeah, and I think so that he makes a distinction between artificial intelligence and intelligence assisting. So AI and IA. And IA, intelligence assisting technology, helps drive up productivity and can actually increase the demand for labor and drive up wages. Kind of think of like Microsoft Word or Excel. Like these are things that are intelligence assisting that now make a whole bunch of jobs. Now we have a bunch of data analysts who are out there doing all this stuff. You know what I mean? And so the lack of jobs caused by this rise in unemployment, right? When we talk about new technological advancement, we need to look back. Oh, good. We've already talked about this. We've touched on this. Looking back of the agriculture to the cities, right? And we need a government that's going to be able to carry us into the new age of this technological economy and this no longer industrial economy, this service economy.
Yes.
Right. We need a government that's going to take us there.
Maintain the full employment.
Maintain as you said full before. Employment.
Because this is the really scary thing, especially now when people are very aware of when the amount of publicity that a technology like ChatGPT is getting, which seems like it can do so many jobs. And he used an example of even when Stiglitz is writing this about how radiologists, people with MDs, are losing their jobs. They're getting automated out of their jobs.
Fun fact, my first internship was automating radiology.
Really?
That was my first internship. My first internship was designing a cognitive neural network that could detect metastasized tumors in the breast.
Wow.
So you wouldn't have to do an autopsy with a radiologist and have a radiologist look at it. You could give it to a machine, and the neural network will just say if it's metastasized or not.
Wow.
And it had a higher percent success rate than an actual radiologist.
Perfect example.
There you go.
Perfect example. So it's like, okay, if these technologies are developing so much and these machines are becoming as smart or smarter than humans, and yeah, plenty of humans are probably going to not need to get paid, right? And the only way to stop that is going to be government intervention, because the owners of businesses, of course, are always going to choose the lower costs, higher profits.
Now, I want to talk about full employment for a second there, because what does full employment mean? Does full employment mean everyone has a job? No, that's not what it means. Full employment means that we have only frictional unemployment. And frictional unemployment means people that are currently searching for work but are fairly fluid in the labor market. They're going in and out of jobs.
Okay.
That's like the United States used to think that its frictional number was 4%. But now that we're down to 3.4%, I think that our frictional number can be around 3.7. I think 3.4 is too low. I think we have too low of an unemployment rate.
Okay.
I think we actually need, this is a whole other topic, but we have a labor shortage in the country that we actually need more workers here. We need more people in the labor market. Right now it's funny because we are at above full employment.
Really?
Yeah, way up. Yeah, this is not sustainable. Anyway, The way to achieve full employment is a mix of fiscal policy and monetary policy. So fiscal policy is when the government spends money. Monetary policy is when the Federal Reserve decides to lower or raise interest rates.
Yes.
And that we're not going to get into that whole conversation, but when the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates, investment goes up. When Federal Reserve raises interest rates, investment goes down. Mm-hmm. And so when you want to grow the economy, you want to spend a bunch of money through fiscal policy, through the government, and you want the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. So more people want to borrow money and spend money and all that stuff.
Invest,
exactly. Full employment is not going to be enough, though. That's not the answer completely, because wages will be cut due to the cheaper means of production, right?
Yes.
So it's not just full employment. We need to also secure the wages too.
Yes. And so something that he talks about for that is progressively taxing to redistribute income.
Absolutely.
And something that's being talked about now with AI is how much productivity it can create, and how much bigger it can make the pie overall. Yeah. But if we continue to go down the path of Reaganomics tax cuts, Trump tax cuts, keeping money in the hands just of the owners and not giving them to any of the people, then we're going to dangerously accelerate towards dystopia.
Definitely. I mean, look, the national pie is growing. The national pie is growing because of the technology, because of AI. We have a larger national income. We need to stop assuming that means everyone's richer. We need to stop assuming that just because we have a higher GDP per capita, that the Ireland example, we still have worse health outcomes. We still have worse education outcomes. We still have worse disposable income.
Talked about this last week.
Yes, and so we need to, exactly. And this is another avenue for that. So market power, globalization, technology, financialization. This is what we're talking about.
Totally.
All these things that increase the national pie, but doesn't get divvied up in the right way.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
So what are the 4 policies that are needed? He goes through 4 policies. He gives some prescription.
Yeah. So one of them is the progressive tax that I just mentioned. One is strengthening worker power, giving more power to unions, making sure they have a seat at the table when these policies are made.
That's the PRO Act.
I don't know what the PRO Act is.
You know what the PRO Act is? It's a really strong pro-union bill in the House and in the House, and its main call to fame is increasing punishment for companies who try to union bust by a lot.
I was just reading today about how frequent, often this happens.
Yes. So really increasing the punishment for union busting, and then making unions create. So I don't want to go into the whole process about how to form a union, but if you want to form a union, you have to get at least 50% or a certain percentage of your workers in your place to sign a card saying that they want an election. And then after that, they say after over 50% say they want an election, then the National Labor Relations Board sets up an election. The PRO Act would say if you can get 50 signatures, then you have the union, you don't need an election.
Okay.
And it can all be secret. You don't have to tell the bosses.
Oh.
So that's huge advantage. So the PRO Act is necessary. The PRO Act is like the biggest. If that ever happens, there was a chance for it to happen in the early days of the Biden presidency, but it didn't pan out. Anyway, so we had strengthened working bargaining power through passing the PRO Act, progressive income taxes.
Ensure intellectual property rights are shared.
Huge.
As far as I know, IP around software is pretty murky.
Yeah, very murky.
But if companies are able to monopolize certain AI IPs, that's going to be too much power.
Way too much power. And I like the idea of any technology that was developed through anything that had government funding behind it. The government funding should be shared more widely. The government should get some of that profit for the investment. And I think that makes perfect sense.
Yes.
All of us invested in a lot of these products that we have, that we use nowadays. We should get a dividend for that.
Yeah.
Whether we knew it or not, our representatives chose to invest in it, and we should get a dividend for their success, because their success wouldn't exist without our money.
I agree with that.
There you go.
I do see political hurdles, but I like the idea. Okay, and then the last policy idea.
Yeah.
We need to recognize the role of government in helping restructure the economy from manufacturing to a service sector economy.
Wow, it's almost like I read the book.
Crazy. So yes, again, the parallel to the change from agricultural to industrial, we are now moving from manufacturing industrial based, and honestly this is a change that's been happening for a while now, but with AI specifically, we are going to be going fully towards a service-based economy.
Yeah, completely.
And the government needs to be a part of that.
What's a quick side tangent, 2 minutes. What's your experience at work with ChatGPT? Has it been brought up?
At work, I've used it independently. It hasn't been brought up by my colleagues.
I get emails all the time about ChatGPT training sessions, and they're teaching everyone how to use it effectively.
Interesting.
I think, honestly, I'm of the opinion that ChatGPT is actually IA, intelligence assisting. I don't know if ChatGPT is going to take anyone's job. I think it's actually going to be like another Excel. I don't see it as, I don't know.
It's close. To be honest, like I have started coding an app with it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is so cool. All right, we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah, sure. But basically, like, I don't have the skills to do it. A programmer would have to get paid a lot of money to do it, and now I wouldn't need to pay a programmer to do it.
There you go.
So that's one anecdotal.
That's a really good example. Actually, my whole thesis is wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next section is market power and AI.
Okay. Yes. I want to talk about the big data. Oh, but actually, big data is
in that one.
Is a big part of this. So this is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Big data is a huge way, especially with a service economy, that companies collect market power. And so you have these companies like specifically, I think, Google, Facebook, and there's one other one that I'm forgetting, and that is definitely mentioned right here.
Cambridge Analytica.
No, that's Amazon.
Oh, Amazon.
Collect a ton of consumer data because they are basically monopolies in their respective areas.
Sure.
Right? So because they have so much data, they can tailor their results and their products really specifically to their users. But on the other side of like selling advertisements, they are so effective in targeting consumers. So on the side of like selling ad space to other businesses, they're also monopolizing that market.
Yeah.
And that's something that's nearly impossible for a smaller company to break into.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing I can think about is TikTok, which does also have a ton of user data, and it's actually pretty impressive that a company was able to make an entry into the space that late in the game. But it's obviously incredibly rare, and we can, like, we're talking about 4 separate companies here. 4 that have all of the user data.
Right. Well, one thing that you noted with people being directly targeted with these ads so effectively, it's also companies are now going to be able to make people pay different prices.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be able to find the people who's going to want the product the most, and they're going to be able to say, I know that you really want the next Zelda game, so we're going to charge you $80. And I know you really would never want to see the Zelda game, so we're going to charge you $40 to try to incentivize you to buy it.
Yeah.
And that totally breaks the basis of economics completely.
Totally.
Because economic theory is built on a notion of non-discriminatory pricing, and this is literally discriminatory pricing now.
Yep.
So totally breaks supply and demand models 100%.
Yeah.
Totally different world we're living in. Should not be allowed to happen.
No, and it talks about how, because of the amount of data these companies have, they can take advantage of each of our specific weaknesses.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
They can exploit all of us. Like, when I read this, I was thinking, I hope I'm not being, like, manipulated into buying more sugary snacks, because that is absolutely my weakness. Yeah. And I don't think that I see ads that make me do it, but it's scary to think about how much influence they can have over us subtly.
Yeah. You know, it's the next issue it goes into, example, which is, I think, the most important that I'm going to run through, is talking about decoding the human genome. So in the early 2000s, humanity was able to successfully decode the human genome, but some private enterprises were able to do it first before public institutions.
Yep.
Okay. The company Myriad was able to identify the genes most associated with breast cancer and charged super high prices for a test that didn't even have great accuracy. Researchers at Yale were able to make a much more accurate, cheaper test using the same genome, but Myriad refused to allow them to use it because they owned the intellectual property rights. Now, luckily, in 2013, the Supreme Court ruled that naturally occurring genes could not be patentable, but for a couple of years, we lived in a dystopia where somebody, quote unquote, owned your genes.
Yeah.
You know? Craziness.
Yeah, I was really excited to read, like, the triumph of the system in this case.
I know. I was actually so happy.
I was like, holy cow.
I felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Like, oh, something works.
Yeah.
Oh my God, wait, something's not broke and we don't have to fix it.
Yeah. But it was like, there was so much effort happening on the government side to get there. And the point that Stiglitz makes is, like, companies will see that and they're like, if we just win this race by a little bit.
Yes.
And we can slide a patent in there, then we can charge ridiculous prices for this good that is, like, so, like, undeniably valuable and necessary. It is exactly the type of good that people will pay almost anything for.
It's your life. How much would you pay to live?
Exactly.
Right? That's the problem with healthcare being for profit. How much would you pay to have your arm straight after you break it? How much should that cost?
That's what like, biotech companies should start. Someone should have a slogan.
How much would you pay?
How much would you pay to live?
How much would you pay to save your mother who raised you? How much would you pay? Oh, jeez. All right. Morbid.
Yeah, I really like this last part, which goes over a lot of different ideas for regulating big data. This really excited me. So
this is really good.
First idea: give ownership to an individual over their data. And the first time I was thinking about I was like, I don't know, because our data is kind of what we're paying for these services with. Like, you're paying for Twitter, for Facebook, for Instagram with your data,
right?
Because otherwise they're free. And I think most people are completely on board with that. People understand that. Right. They're being tracked. They're being
that's a great point.
Harvested. But companies can also pay users at least some money for their data, right? They can, and the government can require that. And Stiglitz brings up an anecdotal example of, like, him talking to a company executive that was overflowing about how happy he was that he could that he was getting this data at such a low cost, even when someone did have to pay when a company did have to pay to buy someone's data,
Yeah.
the company executive was still like, we're making so much money off of this and it's so cheap.
Right.
So there's definitely a cost or a price there to be had.
Yeah.
In addition to that, there's restricting agglomeration of these data sets so that companies can't put together as much related information about each individual person.
Yeah.
That I'm okay on. I don't care that much.
Talking to a data scientist, I'm gonna have a hot take at the end of all this.
Okay. Require informed consent. That seems kind of like a basic thing to me. Compensate people. Already talked about. Having a review process for big data holders.
Yeah. Sure.
That seems like one of those things that but what exactly does that look like? Like that's an extremely general point to be made. Taxing data storage.
Taxing data storage is an interesting one.
Very interesting. I don't really know. I mean, I guess it would just be like X dollars per gig,
right?
Or whatever.
I don't know what that would mean, but is all data equal? Is all data equal? Is the name of your dogs is the name of your first dog equal to your birth date?
Yeah.
How do you even do that?
Good question.
Yeah, I like his last one.
Yeah.
I like his last one.
I kind of like his last one too. Well, one thing before I was about to get to his last one is anonymizing data, which I didn't mention, but I think is
that's a pretty good one.
Very good. I think that's one of my favorites.
Was that in the book?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember that. That's a really good one.
To get rid of
the name,
specific individual targeting,
and just do demographic targeting.
Yeah, demographic or like just you can view trends, but you can't see what every person is.
Right. I feel like that's how clinical data is stored right now.
Yeah.
So why don't we do that? I totally agree. All right, Congress, that's an easy win, dude.
Yeah,
that's an easy one.
We'll call up our representatives. We'll make it happen.
All right, that's an easy one. But the last one,
making data a public good.
Yes,
I love this, and I feel like
amazing.
As a data scientist, as a math guy, it must excite you to no end.
Could you imagine that everyone had access to this data, and everyone was competing to make the best algorithm? There would be no market power.
Yeah,
there's no moat.
Exactly.
Everyone is competing at the same level with the same tools, trying to do the same thing, and everyone's competing against each other. That is what we want out of this. Look,
and we can get I want to let you go, but the insights that we can gain, because people are not only going to be looking at this data from the perspective of how can my company profit.
It's not just going to be a profit incentive. Very curious people. Like I would love to download that data set and do some stuff. You know what I mean? Building a Tableau dashboard. You know?
Yeah.
Like, that would be so fun. I would love that.
Yeah.
You know, and if I would love for it to be anonymous. I would love for there to be informed consent when it goes to the government for this. And I would love for this to be totally independent from any type of legislative or executive body, right? Because I don't want any political involvement.
Sure.
I just want it to be stored in a publicly accessible way. Doesn't mean I want the government running it, really. I mean, I want an independent aspect of the government the same way the Federal Reserve operates.
Okay.
The Federal Reserve doesn't operate with any input from the executive branch of the legislature, and that's how they should operate. And so that actually brings us perfectly to the next point, is how do we battle misinformation? Because this data, the AI, the tech, one of the biggest things that's destroying our world with is misinformation and falsehoods. You know, it makes politics almost impossible, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I think the best way to do it is to battle this is to make a publicly supported media like the BBC for America. The BBC is a completely publicly funded news organization, but it's totally independent from the British government. It might get their money from the government, but it takes no information or, rules from the government.
Sure.
And I think that the United States should do something similar. And it has a lot of respect in the BBC and the UK.
I do fear, I love the idea on an execution level. I fear it's too late. Like, there are people that are too far down the Fox News rabbit hole, essentially, to establish trust in a media like that. And that's the thing now with these online platforms, it gives even more quote unquote alternative facts.
Right.
You know? Meanwhile, our government is hamstrung by our ties to free speech in trying to regulate these social media platforms.
Totally.
It's terrible. And Stiglitz brings up the example of a court case in like 1919.
Yeah,
I think
with the right that you can't say the fire.
Yeah,
in a movie theater or something.
Yeah, you can't cry fire in a crowded theater. It's like we do not have unabated, like unrestricted free speech.
Yeah,
and it makes sense to restrict speech where it is harming the public good.
I say I draw the line at the German line. In Germany, it is you cannot call for the overthrow of the Constitution of the Republic. You cannot. You are not allowed. You are not allowed to challenge the basis form of government because they saw how that worked out. I think the United States needs something similar. You are not allowed to attack the frameworks of democracy. Well,
interesting.
Well, okay.
Yeah, no, I think you need something, but I don't know what it is.
I don't know what it
is. Because I think it's more about, like, almost about how you say what you say rather than what it is you say.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right? No, there needs to be a call to action with it.
Yes.
Right. There needs to be a call to action.
Like, what are you instigating? Are you instigating violence? That's where it becomes problematic.
Exactly.
Another issue. It's all right. We're gonna figure this out.
Yeah, we're gonna get better at it.
Probably.
Definitely. I have faith.
Oh, we were just finishing up with big data, AI, and the difficulty that it poses to democracy and to the economy.
Yeah,
I think we're probably good.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the conclusions is this: advances in tech. Fuck.
Just continue audio. We'll just publish this audio and try it again next time.
What if we try to do video for as much as we could? Like upload the video that we have?
Yeah.
And then just black screen for the rest of it?
We can do that.
Okay.
Or we can also do like go to blank for the rest. Go to Spotify for the rest. You don't want to do that.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Where are we going to post this?
Probably YouTube. I mean, if it's a video, right?
Yeah, sick. Fucking yeah. Go to Spotify for the rest. That's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Fuck it.
Okay.
Starting off strong.
So we have another chapter.
Yes.
To do. So both of us agreed before we read this before we got on this podcast, we didn't go into this chapter. We didn't read this as closely. The chapter is called Why Government. And it's basically Stiglitz's argument to why the best way to solve all these problems is with the government.
And not laissez-faire capitalism, right? Like why does the government and why does collective action need to happen to get these things accomplished?
Yes.
Yeah. And he talks about the importance of regulating and writing the rules of the game.
Yes.
And then also defining what is a public good and what government should be in the business of doing. Because he makes it very clear. Listen, government shouldn't do everything. There's no reason for government to make couches and governments to make beds. There's no reason for that. Mm-hmm. But all the public goods, government needs to be involved. And what those are, some examples: education, defense, electricity, running water, social insurance. And what I want to focus on here is these things weren't always defined as public goods. The definition of public good is very fluid as things become more accessible and our economy becomes more resilient and stronger. Electricity was not a public good. A lot of rural areas in Texas and Oklahoma didn't see electricity until FDR made it a point to electrify the rural areas of this country. Mm-hmm. And he did it through government expansion. Running water was not a public good until government decided it was. And same thing with social insurance. And this defining public good is something that we get to do. Mm-hmm. The collective gets to decide what we want to pay for.
Totally. And I think it depends on kind of where the infrastructure of the country as a whole has gone. Well, what are you being left out of? Yeah. And so, like, as far as the electricity example, I think that's perfect. Of like, you are kind of being separated from the system. Totally. If you aren't a part of this now. And so having something like a national or a public bank, because as you keep saying, it's expensive to be poor. Yeah. And to not be part of the banking system is part of that. we get to use the government to push society forward, basically, and increasing the public goods that people have access to.
Definitely. And he makes a point, not all public goods need to be totally publicly run. There can exist public-private partnerships, right? A lot of times this is the government taking on all the risk, which is not what we want to see in a private-public partnership, but there are private-public say that 10 times fast, that do work. An example is Austria. We've talked about Red Vienna last time.
Yep.
Originally, it was just public, but now in the 80s, in the age of neoliberalism, they did transition to public-private partnerships in their housing construction, and it worked out fairly well for them,
Definitely. The government has a place to play. He talks about how the government can provide public goods, and its role in regulating is necessary. And we've touched on this as we've been talking about the rest of the book, but without government regulation, the markets that even the laissez-faire capitalism proponents are such fans of are simply not operating on the with the assumptions that they need to be to operate well. And I think I've come to the conclusion I do like capitalism to some extent.
Yeah.
I like its ability to encourage development and personal growth or kind of propulsion of certain goals.
Sure.
But that becomes nearly impossible, or at least feels impossible, which can be as effective as it actually being impossible if certain companies feel like they're completely dominant, if market power is through the roof, if these regulations aren't there. He uses... Actually...
Well, I want to bring up a point on regulation. Sometimes regulation could benefit market power. Sometimes regulation could be pushed for by a company who has a strong market capture, and they're the only ones that are going to be able to pay for the regulation. So that an example of that could be, we're talking about data. If you want to have to buy everyone's data, what if only Amazon is able to afford that price? How is an incoming tech company supposed to compete with that? So that's an area of regulation, but that's called regulatory capture.
But then also couldn't the government lower the
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's another aspect. That's regulatory capture. So that's like a government failure, right?
Okay.
That's where Trump appoints a coal baron to be the head of the EPA.
I see.
You know what I mean? Okay. And that happens. So
sure.
That's Trump making Steve Mnuchin his Treasury Secretary, who was the president of Goldman Sachs. That's regulatory capture. So that is a fear of regulation, but with progressive politics it wouldn't happen. But yeah.
Sure. Yeah. He does talk about how opportunities for government failure, which of course are still ripe, but the specific difference he talks about the government having versus other organizations is that the government can compel people and organizations to do things.
With the carrot and the stick. They have a lot.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, that's where I feel like the difference is. Everyone has the carrot.
True.
At least big corporations, rich people and companies have the carrot, but the government has the stick, and you need the stick to set actually hard guardrails.
Right. The government has that monopoly on violence that no other institution can provide. Yeah. And I think he talks about how East Asian countries were able to harness their governments, specifically Vietnam, harness their governments to take their underdeveloped country and really use the organizational capacity of the government to really transition to a strong industrial economy. And it's again because the way the government is able to carry you over into the next phase of advancement through full employment and looking out for your working people and increasing your human capital, that's possible. Yeah. And the government needs to be into the business of doing that.
Exactly. And if the government doesn't, and I'm just going to keep hitting on this point, if the government doesn't do that, then what happens is still a transition, but one in which only the people who are sitting in the front seat behind the wheel of the car driving the transition getting all of the profits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The last part there is like 6 key points. Do you want to just read the bold?
Yeah.
What is that talking about?
So it's in the section called the increasing need for government, and he's mentioning a few different areas where he sees that increasing need. So one is the innovation economy, which is basically the difference in like how we're now producing knowledge, and that's going to be the main resource rather than something like steel or food. The shift to that. The urban economy, because as we've industrialized, we've become more urbanized, and that's going to require government intervention to make sure it goes smoothly. An economy bounded by planetary limitations. We know that companies generally don't care about the environment.
Yeah.
People do. It affects people. The complex economy. Managing an economy in the Adam Smithian world of farms and pin factories is different from managing a post-industrial, globalized, and financialized innovation economy.
Yep.
We need more rules for that. It says the economy in flux. The economy is always changing. I mean, AI right now is the perfect example of this. We need a government that is flexible with it and doesn't allow companies who monopolize these really quickly changing technologies to use them to exploit people.
Definitely.
And then finally, it says a globalized economy, where what happens inside a country often depends on what happens outside its borders.
Mm-hmm.
The government needs to prepare us for the effects of existing in a connected global economy rather than something that is isolated.
Perfect.
Cool.
All right. That was our reading of Stiglitz for this week. Next week, what are we going to hit on? What chapter? What do you think?
Question. Let me check the contents here. So we just finished part 1. Part 2 is kind of going to be getting into the solutions. Oh, there are only 4 more chapters.
Oh, really?
So maybe we should just hit those.
Oh, let's bang it out.
Pages
Oh, yeah.
159 through like 248.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
All right. So the chapters are restoring democracy, restoring a dynamic economy with jobs and opportunity for all, a decent life for all, and reclaiming America.
Love the ending of that.
Wow.
Reclaiming America. That's great.
Yeah. The narrative there sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I can't wait. All right, good. And that's going to be fun. That's going to be our first, talking about solutions. We've kind of bummed everybody out.
Yes.
Kind of depressed everybody to talk about how shitty everything is. But this is the everything sucks part. And now we're going to get into the let's fix it part.
So exciting.
Look at that.
I love that.
Unbelievable.
Okay. Final segment. You don't have notes for this.
I have no notes.
Oh, damn. I have notes.
That's unfortunate. But I think, listen, I know what I believe, and we're going to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. So so what we're going to talk about is democracy, strengths, weaknesses, where we think there's wiggle room. So I was coming into this, and I think I mentioned this, I was more thinking I'm going to argue hard against democracy. I have points against democracy here, but I think I'm going to be pretty open-minded, and I think I fall on both sides in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like since democracy is kind of the default,
mm-hmm.
it's where we're at right now, I should probably explain my idea first.
Yeah. So let me just say, when I think of democracy, the first thing I think of is universal suffrage,
Sure.
consent of the governed, stuff like that.
Yes.
And those are principles I hold dear.
Okay.
So why would I give up those principles for a different system of government? What value are you suggesting that a not universal suffrage system of government would give me?
Sure. So first of all, I think I just want to get really specific in the vocabulary here.
Sure.
Because democratic republic is what we live in.
Yeah.
Democracy is different.
Yeah.
So I am thinking from a against democracy, because I think I think impurifying democracy down to even a democratic republic is where it gets even potentially worse, potentially better in some ways, but it can also get way more corrupt that way. So I've been thinking, so democracy is literally where it is not, it's the people govern. It is not that the people vote on the people that govern.
Right.
So that's where I'm thinking.
So I'll say I'm not a hardcore Democrat in that sense. I'm not going to be for a total system of government where everyone is always doing that.
Okay.
Everyone is always involved, or everyone is always in government.
Okay.
I think I'm definitely more on the Democratic Republic side of things, where people have representatives and they vote for the representatives, and those representatives act on their interest.
Okay.
There's issues with that, and we could talk about and like how I would reform our current system to make it better.
I would love to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I'll start with why I don't think why I think democracy is wrong. So I kind of split it in thinking there are two ways two angles to come at democracy from. Okay? The first is that everyone is voting in their own self-interest.
Yeah.
And thus the interests of the many end up directing the policy.
Sure.
Right? And the policy, and that is how we want to govern, by the interests of the many, because it's going to help raise the country up the most. So my complaint with that, and this isn't something that I've read elsewhere.
Yeah.
I don't think it's right to value the problems of the rich at exactly the same as the problems of the poor. The problems of the haves as equally to the problems of the have-nots. I think that the problems of someone who is struggling to feed their family, who is struggling to find a place to live, to house their children, those I posit are fundamentally more important to be solved and be taken care of than the problems of someone who's worried about being able to afford a yacht.
Yeah.
But they have equal voting power. Mm-hmm. And in a democratic republic, the rich person has much, much more political power.
Yes.
It's completely backwards to how it should be.
Okay. I mean, I obviously agree with you. But when you say that they have different voting power, the class doesn't have different voting power in the Democratic Republic. Take away political corruption for a second, because in a Democratic Republic, the hungry will always outvote those looking for a yacht, right?
I don't.
Avoiding political corruption.
Well, I mean, it depends how many hungry there are.
Oh, sure. So you're saying like if there's only like 10% of people, and then the middle class is even co-conspirating with the people working to find a yacht.
Yeah, I mean, it could be middle class, and I think generally, you could argue that the middle class could have some interests, even some financial interests that do align with the top. Although, if the governance did accurately represent the people in the middle, then the taxes would be very highest on the top, but maybe they don't reach the bottom to the extent they need to. That's my example. I mean, the fundamental ideological point is just that the most dire problems aren't being overrepresented, and I think they would need to be.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
But I'm having trouble. I mean, like, look, I'm having trouble picturing an alternative.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Where like I understand that there are issues with the Democratic Republic process where we give less voting power to the 5% of people who are truly destitute, right? And their interests aren't as represented as they need to be given their circumstances, right? It isn't the same to want an increase in your mortgage tax deduction as wanting to get a food benefit, right? Those are not equal problems, and they shouldn't be treated as equal problems. One should be treated as an emergency, and one should be treated as a novelty, almost, you know? So I understand that. But why does the Democratic, and you're saying that the Democratic Republic process gets in the way of that because...
It might.
Okay.
It might. I think, like, again, this is all... It's all hypothetical.
Yeah.
And I haven't thought through the implementation too much because I feel like the other problem with democracy ends up being the bigger one. Like proportional voting based on socioeconomic status. Literally give more votes to the people who have less. The problem, of course, with that becomes what the other probably bigger problem with democracy is, which is uninformed voters.
Right. That is the largest problem.
Yes. So I can keep going on this, but I feel like getting into that.
That's the more important
interesting.
One. It's actually so interesting that you would bring that up. That it strikes me the separating the different voting blocks or giving weights to different socioeconomic classes. It seems like you're trying to go backwards to prior the French Revolution, actually.
Or like during the French Revolution?
No, prior. So before the French Revolution, there's the three estates. There's the first estate, which is the nobility.
Okay.
Or the priests. I forget. I think the first is the priest. And the second estate is the nobility. Mm-hmm. Then the third estate is everybody else. Mm-hmm. So I guess in your system, you would have the rich people as your top, mm-hmm. the middle people would be the middle class, and then the absolute poor would be the third estate. And then these would all have... No, but you would have even less. Yeah. So, yeah, you would have... Yeah, I understand.
So it's not like a whole, like an equal estate for the top as right. At the bottom.
Right.
It's like literally expanding the proletariat's voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like mechanically doing so.
Right, I understand.
Yeah. I see a gleam in your eye.
It's kind of sick. I mean, it's not like a bad idea. I think that's actually a great idea.
Exactly. But the problem is they don't know what they're...
Right, they don't know what they're voting for.
They have no fucking clue. So I wrote down a bunch of things here to talk about why. So first of all, there's a fallacy. Like what I said as an assumption for this is that everyone's voting in their own self-interest.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
Right.
Which makes sense because it is not in anyone's self-interest to vote. Like the risk, because the chances that your vote means something are crazy minuscule. The chances that your vote is a deciding vote at all is something like 1 in tens of millions.
Maybe in a presidential election, but like not in others.
I mean, maybe not in a mayoral election.
Definitely in a mayoral election. In mayor elections, in city council elections, these things are so tight sometimes.
Even in that, it's less than you think. Like, sure, they're tight, but not tight enough that one vote is going to make the difference.
I guess.
Even if, like, what in your town meeting election, some 300, 400 people voted.
Yeah.
If it's 400 people, right, without you going, it has to be 200 to 200. For you going and voting to actually make a difference. Mm-hmm. Like as a math major, I know you can know.
No, I understand what you're talking about. No, I know.
Really quickly, I need to plug this computer in because it's about to die.
Oh, no.
Okay. I do have a truck.
You can unplug mine in there if there isn't an outlet in there. Okay. Ugh. Which one is yours? The big one. You're okay. Okay.
So, because of that, it makes sense that people don't vote in their own self-interest.
Sure.
Instead, people, except I should note, I have a study here. People do vote in their self-interest to some extent. The study estimates that it's about 15% of the reason that people vote.
Okay.
60% of the reason is split between duty and what they call altruism. Mm-hmm. And altruism is just like, I should do something for the greater good. I should help the country, my community, whatever you're voting on.
Okay.
So I just want to put that out there, that even this basic premise of democracy, in that since everyone is voting for their own self-interest and you get the majority self-interest, like that's not what's happening.
Well, how much did you say was altruism?
It's around 30% for both altruism and duty.
Okay, that's
so 60% total.
I feel like that's awesome. Like, I feel like that shows the resilience of democracy in a lot of ways.
Well,
to be honest,
why?
Well, because if you're voting in the democratic process for duty and altruism, well, altruism is a natural tie to your fellow man, and then duty is also that same emotion. And I think that the thing that makes democracy the strongest form of government is the ties it brings to your neighbors. And I think that when you're in the nation working together to make it better, and you're all feeling somewhat a part of it, and that special day you go to the voting booth, I think there is a genuine feeling of one, stability for the nation, and two, a connection to the people around you to help them.
Okay, see, I liken this more to belonging.
Okay.
It was actually another thing studied.
Oh.
In this study, and it's the percentage of motive attributed to belonging was less, but the authors did note that it could be because people didn't want to say that they were going to vote.
Because it's not like something you had to ask them for it. And any data you get when you ask for somebody, you have to take with a grain of salt, right?
Of course. So I get like your almost spiritual appreciation for democracy in that way.
Yeah.
But I also think it makes for bad governance. And I feel like that's where we should. And I also, I want to start with how I disagree with this point that it brings you together with people.
Okay.
Because I think it's the most polarizing thing we have in our society. I think it's probably worse than religion at this point. I think people can band together with the people on their side, but the level of vitriol it creates for the people on the other side is extraordinarily toxic.
Yes, I mean, that's fine, but I don't think that's an issue with democracy. I think that's the issue with the media system. I don't know if that's an issue with our current democratic framework.
Okay.
I think that's a product of the media infrastructure. I don't think that's a problem with the democratic infrastructure.
Okay. It could be not necessarily.
You know what I mean? I don't think I don't think democracy takes the blame for that. And even if you're in a system without democracy, it's not like different opinions will not be coming. You know, I don't think that there will still be different opinions that will be bubbling up, and there will still be class conflict, and there will still be these issues that come up.
Yeah.
And your system of government needs to be able to make those people feel like they have a chance of changing it. Otherwise, the only way to change it is through violence. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about democracy is that we have all decided to put down the swords and guns and shields and said, okay, you want a war? Prove to me you got the numbers and I'll give up. And we've been able to avoid war through the ballot box. And I think that's one of the beauties of democracy that goes far beyond just the system of governance, but rather a type of human stability that you only get through that. And there's moments in history where that fails us. Obviously, the Civil War is a good example. But the world is more peaceful with more democracies than the other way around.
That is true. And that's one of the best arguments. And that's kind of one of the areas where I feel like I'm more amenable to democracy in that it helps to make people not as angry, except again, I will use our country as not a good example of that. But there's another side to that, which is that people who aren't in democracies, who don't really have much control over their government, often don't riot a ton. Like, they aren't super violent. Sure, there might be a chance for revolution, but if you go to China and like interview people about their government, they're generally okay with it.
Yeah.
Like, they're not super upset. People really just get used to what they have. If anything, the ability for someone like to feel like they can change what they have is probably going to lead them to invest more emotional energy into it and maybe get more upset about things not going more their way.
You know, that I can understand that, but I mean, I'm gonna push back only. Listen, China's an interesting example. The amount of peasant revolutions in China aren't very high.
Okay.
So I'm gonna concede the Chinese example because there hasn't been enough peasant revolutions for me to really say. But you know, the Soviet Union had a massive bloody revolution in Tsarist Russia. The entire European continent erupted in flames in 1848 with people clamoring to get their own election systems and own parliamentary systems, you know, and these were bloody affairs. I think, so what I think is interesting here is, so you would like to, you know what, you would like to go to a system where, okay, help me understand.
Well, I'm just saying, because I still haven't really gotten to what I would like.
Okay.
So you should definitely come at me at the points I'm making. Yeah. But I will get to the actual potential alternatives for you to attack.
No, because I think I agree with the autocracy point can sometimes breed a neutered public. Yeah. I think in the modern age with higher technology, I think that's probably more capable of doing so. I think the governments are going to become better at taking out secret societies, planning coups.
Sure.
You know, I think that's just going to get better and better. But I do think that autocracy will not be as stable as democracy in the future. And my issues and my arguments for that will be, you know, basically Tsarist Russia in 1848 Europe. That's all I got. Yeah.
Sure. There is something to be said about what people will do when they feel powerless.
Right.
But people also feel powerless in this country right now. Like, and I've been listening to, I don't know if you've heard of this podcast, The Run Up, that the New York Times does.
No.
They like interview a bunch of people and ask them how they're feeling about the upcoming elections, and it's something like 60% of people are upset about the Biden-Trump election, and that was pretty much the same with Biden and Trump last time. That was pretty much the same with Trump and Hillary, and people are technically given options, but to a large extent, like, you can argue how true it is that there's similarity between the options, but people feel like they're picking the lesser of two evils all the time, and it just doesn't feel like they're very free as far as choosing who they want to lead them.
Yeah, but that seems like you're talking about reforming democracy rather than, like, that's all true. I think, that's totally true, and I think there are better systems of voting that would lead to better representation. I think that's definitely. Maybe,
but I think you could argue that it's inherent. Like, I mean, there are reforms. I think campaign finance reforms would be a big.
That's huge, obviously.
But I think it'd be hard to remove corruption completely, and I think the problem with these, or remove corruption completely, but also there is an inherent contentiousness that comes out of the structure of our party system of needing to build large coalitions and get a bunch of popular support that necessarily pits certain coalitions against others, and I think is it makes sense that it breeds such, again, this vitriol is the word that I just keep coming back to.
How do you go about making policy that's sustainable if you do it without the people's consent? How does it become sustainable?
What do you mean sustainable?
If you do things that the people don't want.
Well, I don't think that will even happen much. So I think this is a good time to try to get into, I guess, talking about how uneducated people are about politics in general, which is insane. People tend to communicate that they have very strong opinions about things. We talked about this with zoning last week.
Yeah.
Like, people will say that they really don't want new developments to go up, and then when they do go up, they don't even notice.
Yeah, they don't even care.
People will get super fired up about quote-unquote social issues, like whether trans people can play on sports teams, or bathrooms, or the Don't Say Gay bill, and then time after time, poll after poll, it shows all they care about: how much does my food cost?
Right.
The quote-unquote dinner table issues. So that just goes to show the kind of the difference between the dialogue and the voting interests, which really isn't the point that I'm trying to get at here. I want to get at how educated people are. And there was a poll done by Newsweek in like 2011 first of all, I want to start with the very basic idea that this other, because I was saying that there's like two ways you can think about democracy. And the first one is that it's a collection of the self-interests of all the people, and the majority wins. Yeah. The other way to think about it's not self-interest. It's polling basically the opinions of the people on how the country should be run, and that the opinion of the polled majority is going to be the best way to run the country.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of view it more like that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But it doesn't make sense because of how ignorant Americans are. So one of the things this poll said is 11% of people knew the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Yeah. Less than half of people could name their two senators. Less than half could name their current U.S. representative. And that might not even matter as much because those are just members
of a party system
of parties, and it might be irrelevant as to people's viewpoints.
That's what I was about to say, honestly.
But there's also data that shows that people rarely can articulate. Like, people will say they're Republican or Democrat, and they rarely can articulate why.
Yeah.
Or they'll say that they support a candidate, and they can't name the policies of that candidate.
Right.
Plato's argument was that people are just going to elect the best demagogues, like the most well-spoken demagogues. And I think, like, Trump is a perfect example of that happening. He's just the person who said the things in the way that resonated with the people the best.
Yeah.
I want to talk more because I have a few more points about people understanding the economic state of the country.
Yeah. I mean,
the distribution and how off this is. Okay, so according to a Harvard study, most people believe that the top 20% of the country owns about half of the nation's wealth, and that the lower 60% combined, including the 20% in the middle, only about 20% of the wealth. And a whopping 92% of Americans think that's wrong. They think that's out of whack.
Yeah.
In the ideal distribution. In the ideal distribution, they said the lower 60% would have about half of the wealth. The middle 20% would have 20% of the wealth. But what's astonishing about this is how wrong Americans are about reality, which you will know.
Yeah.
In fact, the bottom 80% owns only 7% of the nation's wealth. The top 1% holds 40% of the nation's wealth, which is more than 9 out of 10 people think that the top 20% should have.
Right.
The top 10% of earners take home half the income in the country. And in 2012, the top 1% earned more than a fifth of U.S. income.
Yeah.
People don't have the time or the incentive to learn about the intricacies of the economy.
They don't need to know the intricacies. They
or
don't
policy.
need to. They don't need to participate in a democratic republic. That's why they elect a representative. That's the benefit. Now, I think the country. I don't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
The issue with democracy is that everybody would have the small d total democracy, that everybody needs to become a tax expert. I don't think that's possible. I think people will have a general philosophy of things and then vote for the guy who agrees on those general principles, and that guy will then go and fight for those principles in legislation. That's what's happening.
But the problem is that's so clearly not true, because if that were true, then why would Republicans ever win? Like, if 92% of people think that this view of wealth and income inequality, which is not even close to how bad it actually is, is way out of whack.
Because they don't care about it. They care about immigration.
I think they do care about immigration and other social issues, but I think they also care about this.
They don't care about it as much. You can ask them.
I think they don't understand. I think they do care about it as much because, again, the polls keep saying that they care about the dinner table issues. They want their bottom line to be better. And I think the problem is that they hear more taxes and they think bad. And, like, a more educated voter base will hear more taxes and they won't just think bad.
Well, I do agree with that. And that's why I think the expansion of community college to everybody is the first step of doing that. Do you think education can get us out of it?
No, because there's also specific, like, research that says that college educated people have legitimately no difference in how well informed they are about the government and the economy compared to non-college educated people.
No shot.
I swear to God.
Are you serious?
Yes. The college education, you go to college to get educated on whatever. Like, I'm not learning about any of this shit in engineering.
That's true.
You know? People just focus on what they're doing in their own lives. And so I feel like I can like give you some ideas for reform, potential reform.
Yeah, I'm probably going to agree with you on all the reforms.
Well, not that change it, like other ideas, alternatives.
Okay.
That's a better word.
Okay.
One that I really like is you take a sample of a few tens of thousands of people, say 30,000 people, and you give them paid time off work for 8, 12 weeks, and you educate them on the issues, and you let them vote for what happens.
That, you understand, you just said democracy in its smallest and most real form. That is the ancient Athenian form of democracy. It was a random lottery that they would select, and then that is hardcore maximum democracy.
I'm okay with that.
I'm
okay with having the vocabulary
dope,
wrong, but it means no one else can vote. It means no one who's not part of that can vote.
Yeah, that's like hardcore small d democracy. That is radical democracy. I don't know. That's like a little too much democracy for me, I think. I don't know. No. I think it's pretty good, though. I don't hate that. I mean, election or leadership based off raffle, I like that.
Not even raffle, though, because it requires a more because you're going to educate them over this time.
But you're taking them out of raffle, and you're saying, okay, now we're going to go educate you for a year, and then you're going to help run the country for a little while.
Yeah.
Like a jury duty.
Exactly.
And yeah. So
exactly.
No, I mean, like, that's kind of, yeah, I totally agree with that.
Okay.
That's great.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we can just take away the vast majority of the country's say in politics.
Well, I mean, listen, statistically, it's not actually taking away any of their power.
Exactly. Exactly.
But that's kind of, that's not, what I'm trying to get at is that's not anti-democracy.
Okay.
That's just, yeah.
Okay. I mean, we can argue about the vocabulary.
It's technically against universal suffrage.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, we're talking about reducing the voting population to 0.01% of the population.
I know, but I feel like this is a little... We do that all the time with, like, regulatory agencies. We do that right now with the FDA. We go, hey, we want an FDA. And then we go, hey, you 10 people out of America that are educated on Food and Drug Administration, you make all the rules for Food and Drug Administration.
But that's so not democratic.
It's part of a democratic republic that I think is one of the beneficial aspects of it.
It's coming from a Democrat, but it's not. It's being chosen by the executive branch.
It's being approved. Its creation is being informed by the legislature.
Yeah.
Being appointed by the executive branch and then approved by the legislature again.
Okay.
I think that's fairly democratic enough because the people aren't going to know enough to administer their own food and drugs.
Correct.
So they need experts to do so.
And they need experts to govern them as well.
Right.
This is called an epistocracy. So if this fits into your definition of democracy, fantastic. This isn't going to be much of a debate. But to me, this is governance by the knowledgeable. Mm-hmm. And we're creating the knowledgeable. It's not governance by all.
Why don't you think that everyone could just be knowledgeable, though? Why can't you?
Everyone could, but no one will. No one's incentivized to.
Okay.
Okay,
so hold on. I want to give you a new thing now.
Sure.
Because what you just suggested was we take 10,000 random people out, give them a year-long training on how to be knowledgeable, mm-hmm. and then make them the government. Why don't we just do that in a year of high school?
Not make them the government.
Or make them appoint the areas of government. Why don't we just do that through high school and make a year?
I want that too.
Okay. Would you be okay with universal suffrage post that?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you give them... Well, first of all, because then what happens when they get out of high school? And issues are changing constantly, and politicians are changing constantly, and they have to keep re-educating them on what every politician wants and what the issues are in the macroeconomics and the global situation. Like, it's a pretty complicated job, mm-hmm. right? And you need, the people need updated present education.
That's what the representatives are for. That's what they do. The representatives do that we elect. That's what they're doing. Those are the ones that are the most up to date, and we establish our philosophies, and then they get funneled through the representatives.
But the people are being asked to vote on those representatives every 2, 4, or 6 years.
Yeah, and they should be more frequent.
No. I'm saying the people shouldn't be asked because the people aren't being educated on nearly that basis.
I genuinely think that after a year-long thing in high school where you're taking all civics courses and everything you're talking about is being related to the government and how the government functions, you will have enough understanding going forward to make informed decisions at the ballot box. Right now, we don't have that. We don't have civics in high school. I never took a government class. I took an economics class. I never took a government class. I knew how the Federal Reserve System worked before I knew how the judicial branch worked. So those things, I feel like that would fix a lot of your problems.
I don't think so. I think it would be good for those 18-year-olds who just graduated, but people forget stuff. And I really will stay on this point of like learning something at 18, even if you do remember all of it when you're 68, is going to be so much less relevant at that point.
Okay.
There are going to be certain like overarching like ideas of taxation of people,
What do you
like very basic fundamental things, but there's going to be a ton of change.
Okay, well, how do you feel about doctors who go to med school 50 years ago, who are now currently still doctors, but aren't up on any of the research and don't know anything about the new drugs coming out?
I think that's bad.
I think that's bad, but that doesn't mean, should they not be doctors anymore?
I mean, we could give doctors more tests too, if that's what you're saying. We need doctors is the thing. We don't need everyone to vote because we have these other options that I'm presenting.
Mm-hmm.
Like we already have a doctor shortage. So I think you need updated curriculum. And I also think that
I agree with that too.
only having high schoolers vote is not representative enough.
Okay. I think that there should be school. Okay. To be honest with you, this is what I genuinely think. I think there should be school every year of your entire life for 2 months. Literally. I'm not kidding when I say this. Maybe even 2 weeks. I don't know what it is, but I think there should be. Yeah. If we're getting in the abstract here, I genuinely do believe this. I think there should be a month-long, 2-week-long, 2-month-long program that you zoom in on and you listen to some things talk about the government, and you're kind of paid to be there, and you have to be there just like you have to go to jury duty, and then you vote. But I think that has to be everybody. You know what I mean? I think in that way you can make a universal suffrage and have a knowledgeable voting base, and I do think that's possible.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good, because I do think that there are issues.
But I also would have these be classes, and I would have this even for the sampled group of not the whole population, where you only get to vote if you pass like a test in the middle and at the end.
That's what I was about to ask you. I was about to ask you, would you test them afterwards?
Yeah.
Oh, God. In this scenario where everybody is receiving the exact same class, and everyone is all sitting there taking the same information in, no. Because what if they're neurodivergent, dude? No, neurodivergent deserve to vote too.
You can still learn if you're neurodivergent. You can still take tests.
I don't know. That's a hard call for me. I'm not going to talk about that one. I don't agree with that at all. I don't agree for tests for voting, but I do think some type of knowledge system like jury duty needs to happen.
If you don't have a test, then you can just have someone who's answering all the wrong things because some equivalent of they watch Fox News because they're just misinformed. And the whole point is to try to get these underinformed and misinformed people not directing our country. Like that's, so I feel like the test is needed. Another thing that I had, another idea that I had, sorry, go ahead.
The next thing that I got to talk to you about here is who is teaching them? Who is teaching them? Because those people are really the real government in this scenario.
Who's teaching them?
Yeah.
I don't think who's teaching them is the government. I think who's
the people who
writing the curriculum.
Yes, the people who's writing the curriculum is the true government. So who are they?
I think it might be easier than you expect to write up a test that...
Not just a test, the curriculum.
Oh, I know. But I think once you have a test, you can make a curriculum. You can build a curriculum around it. And I think you can get bipartisan agreement to the types of things that should be on a test that people.
But you're picking what things are important enough to teach this group of 10,000 people. You're picking what are the issues that they need to go on. The people are supposed to tell you what are the issues in their area and in their neighborhood. That's what needs to happen. Because without that, you don't actually know what they're thinking. You're only assuming what is the public good. There's no measure. There's no thermometer for the public good. As bad as it is, the ballot box is our only measurement. And without it, it is just autocrats who design these curriculum.
I don't think that's true because there are tons of polls that are done that we keep talking about, that everyone talks about, that are not just when people go to vote at the ballot box. that's a perfect example. You could use polling to see what issues are the most important to people, and you can create curriculum based
This is the
around
issue.
being more informed on
This is the issue that I think I'm going to run into at all of this. Who's conducting the polls? You see, this is without a democratic oversight of these things, they cannot be trusted. And no one should or would trust them.
Democratic oversight can't be any more trusted. Besides the fact that we have...
No, democratic oversight can be more trusted because we could vote the people out. We could change the entire system of government.
But we...
Not system, but the people...
But it can be changed to something that is less trustworthy. Like, we're operating on this assumption that just because something is democratically or popularly supported, that it is better.
I'm not saying that it's better. I'm not going to say it's better. But it's more responsive to what people desire, right?
It's more responsive to something.
Right. Right. Because your whole thing is that it's not actually what they desire.
But the thing is, because you can also just say, like, you can build boards basically of people where the boards are big enough that there is basically no gain to be had by corrupting any of the individual members. Mm-hmm. And they can be non-democratic. Like, you can do it by selecting experts from some field. I was like, you were getting on your high school point. What I was going to say is, like, I think there should just be a pathway, an academic pathway into the government. That's like a post-college thing.
Oh, God. Oh, Jesus. Like civil service exams from ancient China? Like, that's so... What you breed from that is an academic tyranny, and we already have that in this country. The judges are already what you're describing. You're describing the judges, and we go off and talk all the time about how corrupt and awful our judicial system is. But that's what you want. That's what that would lead to. That's what we already have.
Why would that be the same? Because the judges aren't elected, they're appointed after getting an education,
right,
in the law.
Yeah,
and so you're saying these people would be the same way,
exactly the same.
I still think it might be.
I see no difference. And talk about breeding elitism, right? I mean, are these judges going to have the best in mind for the people? They're going to be surrounded in this class structure that is full of affluence, going to university and stuff. Well, there could be programs to get them into impoverished areas. You know what I mean? So I understand that.
I think it might be, honestly, like if you say you had a council of like 1,000 of them that ruled at any given time.
Yeah.
Or it was like this program this program entered 100 per year, and every person had a 10-year term, and at the end of the 10-year term they got cycled out and 100 new people got in. So there's 1,000 at every moment, right? That's big enough so that no one has that much power.
Oh,
first of all,
I guess, but that's not really the point.
And if you make them, so let's say you pay them well, you pay them very well. And I mean, and maybe that's even more dangerous because once they get a taste for money, they're going to want more. But if you pay them well enough that they're almost not incentivized to be corrupted, right? Pay them something like $10 million a year. That's your legislative budget. And then you have them make the laws and appoint the executors. There is very little corruption that can be had because almost like weirdly a lack of transparency can be a benefit here, because lobbying organizations or whatever their analog in this type of system wouldn't have insight into what is happening.
But we want lobbying. We want elderly communities to be able to send a lobbyist in there and to fight for their rights at nursing homes.
But
we want labor unions to be able to send their representative to Congress and tell them, listen, we're getting screwed over here at Amazon. We need help.
But for every one of those examples you can give, I can give the example
of
I don't want all of big oil to be in the Congress. We can make those illegal.
We can make those. There are reforms we could empower working people and disadvantage corporations. We can say you're not allowed to come in from a corporation, but you can come in if you're from a union. See, there's ways around this.
Well,
you could just be.
Why couldn't corporations just make unions that could fit into these guidelines?
That's not how it works.
When it comes down to it, again, if we have a democracy, the language is always going to be up to interpretation. There's always going to be ways for corporations or bad actors on a case-by-case basis to get what they want. And I think when you're ruling by the informed, by the educated, you can have awareness of these case-by-case bases where they can specifically expel bad actors. And they're not like, okay, technically you are in here according to the law, so I have to let you have your say. They're like, no, I see what you're doing here. Get the fuck out.
How do you feel about China's system of government?
I think it's...
Because you're not far off from that.
It's complicated. I think it's pretty far off from that. China is a one-man autocracy at this point. Like, there are not other people who really have a say in how the country goes.
So, okay.
I'm talking about 1,000.
I mean, they do have a People's Congress.
Cool. Yeah.
I think whatever you suggest will become that.
Why?
Is there not going to be any executive?
I think I don't know if there has to be a chief executive.
It could be very cycling. Oh yeah, so that's pretty actually. That'll be stable. If like every month it's a different executive, because it doesn't actually matter.
Oh sure, I guess that's one way to think about it. I was thinking just in terms of like, there's not one person in charge of everything. There's one person in charge of the military that does that. There's one person in charge of food and drug that does that. There's one person in charge of like there's a bunch of cabinet members basically that are all ruling, and you don't have to have a president. Because when you think about like the president will probably need to rely on most of their cabinet members anyways. What the president's really there for is like negotiation between parties.
But do you think that's different from how China's operating right now? Do you think like it's actually Xi's making every decision? Like,
yes.
No, obviously not.
I do.
You do think that?
Yeah. I think like Xi really is a complete cult of personality, just like Putin is in Russia right now.
Okay.
Entirely. I think that's why they make like big mistakes.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's why they're so unstable and so terrible in the world.
But the thing is, China works in a lot of ways. I think talking about China is good in this context because we completely vilify them from an American perspective, and that is too black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And they're terrible, and they're a perfect example of like why it is scary to move away from democracy, and the biggest like idea of catastrophes can start to happen when democracy isn't in place, like a genocide.
Right.
But China, as Stiglitz has mentioned several times, because of it being more authoritarian, was able to fucking wrench 740 million people out of poverty.
Right.
It has the agility, the ability to actually govern instead of just being stuck because of the fear of anyone taking too much power.
Yeah. No, and I understand that. I think at the end of the day, that point specifically is probably the best point in favor of autocracy, the same way that a peaceful world is the best point in favor of democracy. I think democracies need to be able to move. Mm-hmm. Democracies cannot be function with their hands tied behind their back. And there are reforms we can take that can change that. I think parliamentary systems are way better than what we have because parliamentary systems can win an election and then run the government.
Yes.
In America, it does not work like that, and it causes too many problems to name. And I think that there are ways that we can adjust to a mixed member parliament where it's proportional representation, and then the party who wins the most elects the representative, and then we're good to go. I think, and then they run the government, and that's it. And I think that that's a better way to do things, so at least things happen. Because stagnation is the worst type of thing. So I think that there's issues with that, but I don't think that's an issue with democracy in its philosophical sense or representative democracy in its philosophical sense. I think that's just an issue of our current form of it and an issue with our Constitution. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater with that one. So, I think that, democracy is something we're going to have to fight for, and we're going to have to prove that it's functionable in the modern world. And I know that there are issues with it. And I think that fighting for it in the 21st century and making it work despite all of its flaws is going to be the challenge of the West's future. And I'm pretty confident we're going to be able to win it.
Really?
Yeah. No, I do. I'm pretty confident. I feel good about it.
Okay. I think I'm more skeptical.
I know. I'm I'm an optimistic guy.
Yeah, we're just in a pretty bad spot.
I know. But hey, you know what? I know everything sucks, but we're going to fix it.
Amen. And that's a wrap.
Great stuff, Ben. That was fantastic.
All right. I liked that a lot.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, people.
Oh. Dude, are you fucking kidding me?